Welcome to Potter Eclipse. Today's adventure: what if Harry woke in James Potter's body on the night Voldemort came? If you haven't already, smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a story. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. Waking as James, the first thing was the smell of wood smoke and milk, and it was wrong because the last thing had been a hospital corridor going dark. Harry Potter opened his eyes in a room he had only ever seen in photographs. Firelight moved on a low ceiling. There was a window with the curtains half drawn, and beyond it a village street going blue with dusk, and a wireless somewhere murmuring a song that had been off the air for 40 years. His hands lay open on the arms of a chair he did not own, in a house he had never lived in, and they were not his hands. The fingers were longer. There was no callus on the wand hand where his own callus had been for 2 decades. There was no ring. There was no scar across the back of the knuckles where a Death Eater's blade had once opened him to the bone. He sat very still and let the wrongness arrive in full. He knew this room. He had held a photograph of it in the pages of an album Hagrid had given him when he was 11, and he had looked at it so many times that the corners had gone soft as cloth. He knew the crooked shelf of books with the spines cracked white. He knew the chipped blue jug on the sill that someone had filled with the last of the autumn asters. He knew without rising that if he crossed to the mantel he would find a moving photograph of 4 young men laughing in the snow, and that one of them would be a fat-faced boy who would, before this night was finished, sell every soul in this house to the Dark Lord for the price of his own skin. A floorboard creaked overhead. Then a voice, light, unhurried, threaded through with the careless happiness of someone who believes the worst is over, began to sing. It was his mother's voice. Harry did not move. He had spent a great part of his life learning what to do with the things that could break a man, and the answer was always the same: not yet, not now. Feel it later, when feeling it will not get anyone killed. So he held himself in the chair while the song went on above him, while the wood smoke and the milk and the long-dead wireless filled his chest like water filling a wreck, and he made himself think. He looked down at the hands again. He flexed them. He turned the left one over and saw the faint ink stain on the side of the middle finger, the mark of a man who wrote with a quill and gripped it too hard, and he understood the whole of it then, all at once, the way you understand a precipice the instant your foot goes over the edge. These were James Potter's hands. He raised one of them and touched his own face, and the face was wrong too, no glasses, which was wrong because James had worn glasses. Then his fingers found the frames pushed up into the hair, and the wrongness corrected itself, and that correction was somehow the most terrible thing of all. He knew where his father kept his glasses when he wasn't reading. He knew it from the inside. There was a man's whole life folded into this body like a letter into an envelope, and Harry had been posted into it. On the table at his elbow lay a wand. Mahogany, 11 inches, good for transfiguration. He knew the make of it as he knew the weather, knowledge that did not belong to him arriving as if it always had. He picked it up. It was warm. It answered his grip with a low hum of a chord as a wand answers its master, and it was not his wand, and it answered him anyway, and that told him something he did not yet have time to be glad of. Whatever he was now, the magic in this house thought he was James. The wireless changed songs. Upstairs his mother laughed at something the baby had done. How? The word surfaced once and he held it under because how was a luxury and he had no time for luxuries, but the answer came anyway in fragments, the way deep water gives back a broken picture of the sky. The last thing of his own life, a corridor going dark. An old man's voice, his own, he thought, though he had not been old. He had been 40 and tired in a way that had nothing to do with years, saying a name into the quiet. And before the dark, a sensation he had felt exactly once before, in a station that was not a station, white and endless, where he had chosen once to walk back into the world rather than go on. The same hand on the back of his neck. The same sense of an enormous and patient machinery turning over somewhere beneath the floor of everything, vast as weather, indifferent as tide. He had been master of 3 deathly objects once. He had held the stone that called the dead and the wand that beat death's own, and the cloak death itself could not see through, all 3 at one time, the only man in the long history of the world to do it, and the lore had always said that the one who held all 3 became death's master, and Harry had always thought that a children's story, a flourish to frighten students with. Perhaps it was not. Perhaps death, having once been mastered, remembered. Perhaps when the corridor went dark some account that had been open since a station that was not a station had at last come due, and a debt had been paid backward into the one place and the one night the master of death had wanted past all reason to undo. He did not know, he would never know. The machinery did not explain itself to the things it moved. It did not matter how. It mattered that he was here and that the hour was already running. The baby, Harry, stood. He stood too fast and the room tilted, the unfamiliar height of the body throwing his sense of the floor, and he caught the mantle and breathed. Through the window the village was nearly dark now. A jack-o'-lantern grinned orange on a doorstep across the lane. Somewhere children were out in the cold, going door to door in sheets and pointed hats, and one of them shrieked with delight and the sound carried thin and silver on the air, and Harry counted, because counting was a thing you could do when the rest of you wanted to come apart. It was Halloween. He did not need a calendar. He had carried this date the way other men carry a bullet too close to the spine, all his life, every year, the one date that had made an orphan of him before he could speak. The 31st of October, 1981. The night the Dark Lord came to Godric's Hollow. Tonight, the cold that went through him then had nothing to do with the season. It was the cold of a man handed, without warning and without mercy, the single thing he has wanted past all sense and reason and the laws of the turning world, and who understands in the same instant exactly how little time he has to keep it. He let himself have 1 second. He gave himself the length of a single breath to stand in his father's body in his father's house, and know that his mother was alive upstairs and that the baby she was singing to was him, 15 months old, warm, unmarked, with no scar on his forehead and no prophecy yet carved into his small life and no 20 years of war waiting like a wolf in the dark of the future. 1 breath, he took it. Then he put it away and went to work because the man coming up the lane did not care what Harry Potter wanted and never had. He crossed to the window and looked out properly, keeping to the side, his duelist's habit older than this body and surfacing through it without thought. The lane was empty. The gate at the end of the path stood shut. The hedge threw its evening shadow across the grass. No robed figure yet, no flicker of green at the edge of sight. He had time minutes, his memory of the histories told him, not hours, because by every account he had read it all happened fast once it began. James downstairs and Lily upstairs and the whole of it over before the kettle on the hob had time to go cold. He turned from the window and made himself reckon it the way he would reckon any field before any fight, stripping the terror off the facts one by one. Fact, the Fidelius charm that hid this house was already broken. Not failing broken hours ago, the instant Peter Pettigrew opened his mouth to the Dark Lord. The protection that should have made this cottage invisible to every enemy in the world was a dead thing now, a lock with the key already handed across. That was why Voldemort was coming. That was the whole of how the worst night of the world had happened. Not a curse breaker, not a siege, not a broken ward, a friend, a small, gray, treacherous friend who had simply told. Fact, Harry knew it. He knew it as he knew his own name, both his names. The secret keeper was not Sirius. They had swapped, he and Sirius, a clever trick to wrong-foot the hunters, and the trick had killed them, because the one they trusted instead was the one already bought. Harry had grown up inside the wreckage of that decision. He knew every brick of it. Fact, he had a wand that answered him in a body that, by the loose, easy strength of it as he'd stood, was young and whole and strong, 2 years out of school and at the height of what it would ever be. James Potter had been, by every account Harry had heard, a duelist of real and dangerous gift, and Harry Potter had survived a war. He had stood in front of this same enemy more times than any living man and walked away. Put those two things in one body and you had something the histories had never reckoned on. He tested it because a soldier who walks into a fight without knowing what his body can do is a soldier who finds out at the worst possible moment. He raised the mahogany wand and cast, silently, a simple thing, a shield, the first spell every duelist learns and the last one that ever saves him. It came up faster and harder than any shield Harry Potter had ever cast in his own body, a wall of force that hummed in the air and made the candle flames lie flat, and he understood in the space of that one spell the shape of what he had been given. James Potter's body was strong, younger than Harry's own had ever been when it mattered, 2 years out of school, the magic in it deep and easy and unspent by 20 years of war. And the mind driving it was Harry's, honed on the hardest whetstone the world had ever made. The raw power of a gifted young wizard at his peak, steered by the instincts of a man who had survived the worst the dark could do. He let the shield fall and felt the truth of it settle into him like a blade settling into a familiar grip. He had wondered in the first seconds whether this body could fight the thing that was coming. It could. With him inside it, it could do a great deal more than fight. And one fact more, the coldest, the one he set down last and hardest because it was the one that would govern everything. He could not win tonight, not the way the wanting part of him screamed to win. He could not kill Voldemort on the floor of this cottage, not with the cleverest stroke, not with the truest aim, because the thing coming up the lane was not a man and could not die, not yet. Dark Lord had torn his soul into pieces and hidden the pieces in the corners of the world, and until those pieces were found and unmade, killing the body would buy nothing but a few years' grace and a vapor blown into the dark. Harry knew this because he had spent a year of his youth crawling through the ruin of the world hunting those pieces one by one. He knew where every one of them was. He knew tonight, while their maker's body was about to walk through that door, that not a single one had yet been touched. So victory tonight was not killing Voldemort. Victory tonight was that the 3 people in this house were still breathing in the morning, that he could do. That, he thought, with the cold, clean certainty settling into him like ballast into a hull, that he would do, or there would be nothing left of any Harry Potter worth the name in any timeline that survived this hour. He moved through the room and took its measure as a board, not a home. The fireplace first, he knelt and threw a pinch of powder from the pot on the mantel into the grate and said the name of the only safe house he could think of, and the flames flared green and guttered at once to ordinary orange, the connection dead, the flue shut to this hearth as surely as the gate had been opened to its enemy. Of course. You did not open a door without first nailing shut the windows. The front door, when he laid a hand against it, hummed with the wrongness of the dead Fidelius, the protection not so much broken as inverted, a ward that had once said no one may find this house, now whispering here, here, here to the one thing in the world that had been told the way in. He took his hand off the wood as if it had burned. There was a holster strapped under the cuff of the shirt he wore, James's habit, and Auror's habit, and Harry's own, the one piece of the two men that was already the same, and in the inner pocket of the coat thrown over the chair there was a small square mirror, cloudy two-way twin of one Sirius carried. He left it where it was. There was no time to call for help that could not come, and worse, a voice raised now would tell the thing on the path exactly how many hearts were still beating inside the box. Silence was a weapon, and he had few enough of those. He went up the stairs two at a time. She was in the nursery, and she turned when the door opened, and she smiled at him, and Harry's whole carefully built composure nearly went out from under him like a rug pulled sideways. Lily Potter was 21 years old. Her hair was loose and the color of the firelight, and there was flour on her wrist from something earlier in the day, and her eyes, his eyes, the eyes he had spent a lifetime being told were hers. Seeing them now in the living face that had given them, her eyes were green and quick and entirely unafraid, and she was looking at him as if he were the most ordinary and beloved fixture of her whole world, which to her he was. "He won't go down," she said, rueful, fond. "He knows it's a holiday." I think Sirius taught him the word treacle, and now he's holding the entire house hostage. On the floor by the cot lay a toy broomstick, twigs chewed, a foot of polished handle, Sirius's gift. Harry knew without being told, because Sirius was the only person reckless enough to give a 1-year-old a thing that flew. In her arms the baby twisted to look at the door. Round-faced, dark-haired, a tuft of it sticking up at the back exactly where Harry's own had never lain flat a day in his life. The baby saw him and made a sound of pure, uncomplicated delight and reached out both fat arms. "Duh," the baby said. "Duh, duh." Harry stopped in the doorway because his knees had stopped being reliable. There is a particular cruelty in being given everything you have ever grieved all at once in a room you have to leave in 5 minutes or watch burn. He had wished for this. As a boy in a cupboard, as a teenager in a war, as a grown man on bad nights still, he had built this room in his mind 10,000 times, the mother, the father, the impossible, ordinary warmth of a house where he belonged, and he had always known it for a ghost, a thing the mirror had shown him once and he had had to walk away from. And here it was, breathing, smelling of milk and wood smoke, holding out its arms and calling him duh. He crossed the room and took his infant self out of his mother's arms, and the weight of the child against his chest was the realest thing he had ever felt in 2 lifetimes. "Lily," he said, and his voice, James's voice, deeper than his own, steadier than he had any right to, came out level. "I need you to listen to me, and I need you not to ask me how I know, not yet." The smile went out of her face, not into fear. Into attention. That quick, fierce focusing he would later learn was the truest thing about her, the thing that had made her one of the best of her year and a terror in the Order's drills. She had heard the change in him. Lily Potter had always heard everything. "James," she said carefully, "what happened? He's coming tonight now." He held her eyes. "The secret's broken," Peter told him. For a heartbeat she did not move, and he watched the words land, watched her measure them against everything she knew, and he saw her decide in less than a second, faster than he could have managed at her age, to believe him. Because something in his face was not arguable. "Peter," she said, and it was not a question, it was the sound of a wound being named. Her wand was already in her hand, he had not seen her reach for it. "We made him secret keeper 3 weeks ago. Sirius said it was perfect, that no one would ever think to torture her, that they'd all come after him instead, that Peter could hide where." She stopped. The arithmetic finished itself behind her eyes, and what was left was not disbelief, because Lily Evans had never had the luxury of disbelief. "He's known where we sleep for 3 weeks, and tonight he sold it." Harry kept his voice flat, because flat was a wall she could lean on and grief was not. "We hang Peter later. There's a list of people I am going to make answer for tonight, and he's near the top of it, but he is a problem for a morning the 3 of us have to live to see. Right now there's exactly one thing that matters in the world, and you're holding him." Her jaw set. She had stopped being his wife in that instant and become something older and harder, the thing a mother becomes when the wolf is actually at the door, and Harry, who had been on the receiving end of that exact transformation once, in a different house for his sake, felt his chest go tight and ruthlessly let it go. "Take Harry." He put the baby back into her arms, and the child complained and gripped a fistful of his shirt, and he had to unfold the small fingers one at a time, and that nearly finished him, that small refusal, and he set it aside with the rest. "The window in our room faces the back garden. There's no apparition out of the house. He'll have thrown up an anti-disapparition jinx the moment he reached the lane. That's how he works. He closes the box before he opens it." Knowledge that was not James's flowing out in James's voice, and Lily took it without question because the house had begun very faintly to feel wrong and she could feel it too. If the back's clear, over the wall into the Diggle's garden, then run for the church. There are people there tonight, witnesses, and he doesn't like witnesses while he's still pretending to be careful. Don't wait for me. James, don't wait for me. He took her face in his hands, his father's hands, and he would think about that later, all of it later or never, and for 1 second he let her see something true, because she had earned it and because he might not get another chance. I have done this before, he said. I know how he fights, I know every door he'll come through. I am going to hold him here and you are going to live, and so is that boy, and that is not a hope, Lily, it's a fact. I'm telling it to you as a fact. Now go. Below them the gate clicked. It was a small sound, a latch lifting, dropping, the most domestic sound in the world. Harry had heard it 10,000 times in his own life, the gate of his aunt's house, the gate of the burrow, the gate of 100 ordinary places, and he would never again, as long as either of his lives lasted, hear it without the bottom dropping out of the world. Lily had gone white. She had heard it too, and unlike him she did not need to be told what it meant, because she had lived these months in the shadow of exactly this, the waiting, the dread, the knowledge that one night the box they hid in would open. Go, Harry said very quietly. I love you, go now. She went. To her enormous and eternal credit, she did not scream and she did not freeze and she did not waste a breath arguing. She clutched the baby to her and ran for the bedroom and the back window, her bare feet quick on the boards, and Harry went after her. Of course, Voldemort did not leave doors open. He never had. That changed the plan. It did not break it. He reached the bedroom door as the casement banged open and Lily swore, low and vicious. The cold poured in past her and she had already worked out what he had. The air shivered against an invisible skin a foot beyond the sill, the telltale resistance of a barrier jinx, and when she thrust her wand at it, a ripple of black ran across nothing and the night refused to let her through. She rounded on him, no panic in her, only that ferocious focus, the look of a woman doing arithmetic with her child's life as the only number that mattered. Sealed, she said. All of it, all of it. He boxes the house before he knocks. Harry took the situation apart and put it back together in the shape of something survivable. Down was where the fight would be, up was where his family would not be in it. New plan, and it's better than the old one. You don't run, you fort. This room, door shut, every ward you've ever learned, than the ones you invented and never showed anyone. Because she had invented spells, he knew that, had read it once in the margins of an old charms text she'd annotated, the cleverest witch of her year. He has to come through me to reach the stairs, and he is not coming through me. If he does, if you hear it, go quiet down there. You take Harry into the wardrobe, you hold him, and you do not come out for anyone whose voice you don't know better than your own. Not Dumbledore, not Sirius, not me. Voices can be stolen, you understand. James, how do you, Lily? He caught her wrist. The baby was crying now, low and frightened, feeding off the air. Trust me for 10 minutes. You can hate me for the secrets after 10 minutes. She looked at him a heartbeat longer, and then she did the bravest thing he saw anyone do that whole impossible night. She chose to trust the stranger wearing her husband's face, because the stranger was the only chance her son had. She nodded once hard and dragged the bedroom door shut between them, and he heard her voice rise at once into the low fast cadence of warding, charm laid over charm, and he turned from it and went down into the dark to buy her the 10 minutes. On his way down he stopped for 1 second at the mantel. The photograph was there exactly as he had known it would be, 4 young men in the snow, arms across each other's shoulders, laughing at something the camera had not caught. James, tall and grinning. Sirius, handsome and reckless, a thin tired boy who had to be Remus, smiling despite himself. And the fourth, small and round-faced and beaming up at the others with an adoration that Harry now knew for exactly what it was, the worship of a small man for the large men whose protection he would, when the price was right, trade for his own skin. Harry looked at Peter Pettigrew's photographed face, laughing in the snow with the friends he had already this very night sold to death, and felt the cold in him go a few degrees colder. He did not hate Peter. Hate was a fire, and Harry had no fuel to spare for it tonight. What he felt was simpler and harder, the flat certainty of a man looking at a problem he intended to solve. You're alive somewhere right now, he thought at the laughing photograph. You think you've won. You think you handed us over and walked away clean. And one day soon, Peter, I am going to be standing in front of you, and you are going to learn that the one thing you never accounted for is a man who already knows exactly what you are. He set the photograph face down on the mantel gently, so the 4 boys would not have to watch what came next, and went down to meet the thing coming up the path. Downstairs, Voldemort was still coming up the path. He came slowly. That was the thing the histories never made you feel, the leisure of it, the obscene patience of a being who had never met a door he could not open or a man he could not break, and who therefore wasted nothing, hurried at nothing, savored the approach the way another creature savors a meal it has already caught. He was perhaps 15 seconds from the steps. To a frightened man, those 15 seconds would have been nothing, a single held breath. To Harry Potter, who had learned the hard mathematics of fighting from people who died teaching it to him, 15 seconds was a fortune, and he spent it. He did not run, he worked. The mahogany wand came up and the sitting room began, very quietly, to change. He took the heavy oak settle from the far wall and slid it on a whispered charm until it sat at an angle across the foot of the stairs. not a barricade. A barricade was a thing you fought to and died at, but a funnel, a shape in the room that would make a tall figure turn his shoulders just so to pass it, half a second of committed motion that a wand was already waiting for. He took the hearthrug and the boards beneath it and laid into them a tripping jinx of the kind the Order used on raids, the kind that did nothing to the man who said it, and took the legs from under anyone else who crossed the threshold of the hearth. He charmed the chipped blue jug of asters off the sill and into the dark angle beside the door at head height, holding it on nothing, a stupid domestic thing turned into a distraction he could drop into a duelist's eyeline at the cost of a single thought. None of it would beat Voldemort, he knew that with a flat, unsentimental clarity. You did not beat Lord Voldemort with a settle and a tripping jinx and a jug of dead flowers, but Harry had not learned to fight from people who believed in single perfect strokes. He had learned it from a one-eyed Auror with a chunk gone from his nose who had hammered one thing into him past all the rest. You do not win a fight with the killing blow, you win it with the half-second the killing blow happens inside, and you build that half-second out of 100 mean little things your enemy is too proud to expect. Voldemort was the proudest thing that had ever lived. He would walk into a sitting room expecting a boy and a wand and a quick green death, and every cheap trick in the room was a half-second pried out of his certainty, and Harry meant to live in those half-seconds and get his family to mourning inside them. And he knew how Voldemort would open, which was the rarest advantage a duelist could have. The Dark Lord did not test an opponent he held in contempt. He did not faint, did not circle, did not spend emotion learning a man he had already decided was beneath learning. He would open with the killing curse, fast and unannounced, because he had never in his life needed a second spell against the likes of James Potter and saw no reason to begin tonight. That was the whole of his weakness, the one Harry had paid in blood to understand. Voldemort's certainty was a kind of blindness, and a blind man swings first and swings where he expects you to be. Harry did not intend to be there. He intended to be half a step left of where a frightened boy would stand, a shield already rising and a curse of his own already in the air, and he intended the first 10 seconds to teach Lord Voldemort a thing the creature had not learned in 50 years of murder, that the floor is not always firm, that the room is not always empty, that somewhere in the wide world there might at last be one door he should have been afraid to open. He set the last of it, a shield charm primed and dormant at the back of his mind, a disillusionment ready on his own outline, the Patronus held coiled and unsummoned because the cold coming off the thing on the path was not Dementor cold but it was kin to it, and then there was no more time to spend because the figure had reached the bottom step. Harry breathed out. He thought of his mother's voice on the stair behind him, warding a door against the end of the world. He thought of the impossible weight of himself, 15 months old, that he had held against his chest 5 minutes and a lifetime ago. He thought with the part of him that had read the histories until the corners went soft as cloth, this is the room, this is the night, this is where it all began, and it began with my father standing here with nothing in his hands. He did not have nothing in his hands. Harry turned to face the door, and as he turned he did the thing he had done before every fight that had ever mattered. He stopped being afraid. Not because the fear left, it never left, but because he had learned in a hard school to set it where it could not reach his hands. His breathing went slow and even. His grip on the mahogany wand settled into the old address, weight forward, point low, the loose, ready stance of a man who knows that the duelists who survive are the ones who do not telegraph. The fire still burned in the grate. The asters leaned in the chipped blue jug at head height in the dark where he had hung them. The most ordinary room in England, rigged like a snare, and on the far side of the front door the tall robed shape stood at the foot of the steps with the unhurried patience of a thing that has never been refused. Harry knew that walk and the stillness after it. He had seen it in graveyards and throne rooms and at the bottom of his own nightmares, the leisure, the certainty, the absolute conviction of a creature that had never once believed it could lose. He thought with the cold, flat clarity that was the truest thing about him in a fight, you have never met me before. You think you know exactly what's behind this door. You think it's a frightened boy who will die buying his family 30 seconds. He raised the wand. He thought, it's the man who's already killed you once. Through the front window, past the half-drawn curtain, the figure tilted its head, that reptilian, considering motion he would have known anywhere, as if savoring the scent of the fear it expected to find inside. The porch lamp caught the underside of the hood and showed nothing human there, only a pallor and the suggestion of slitted red. Then a voice came through the door, soft, almost gentle, and it was the worst voice in the world. "James Potter," said Lord Voldemort. "Stand aside, and I needn't kill you. It's the boy I've come for. Give me the boy." Harry listened to that voice come through the door and felt beneath the cold readiness the strangest absence of fear. He had stood in front of this creature so many times, in a chamber under a school, in a graveyard bound to a headstone, a boy of 14 watching it claw its way back into a body, in a forest walking to his own death, in a great ruined hall while the castle burned around them and a school full of children fought and died. He knew this enemy the way you know a recurring nightmare, every beat of it, every cruelty, and the knowing had long ago worn the terror down to something flat and usable. The thing on the other side of the door thought it was meeting James Potter for the first time. It was, in truth, meeting the one opponent in all the world who had its whole measure, who had watched it win and watched it lose and watched it die, and had come back through the wreck of time carrying every lesson. The voice that should have frozen his blood instead steadied his hand on the wand, because it was, at last, a known quantity. Fear is the gap between what you face and what you understand. Harry had no gap left. He understood Lord Voldemort completely, and what you understand completely you can beat. In the histories Harry had read, James Potter had shouted for Lily to run and had died seconds later, wandless, buying those seconds with his life because there had been nothing else to buy them with. He had been 21 years old and brave past all sense and entirely, hopelessly outmatched, and he had stood in this room and met that voice with nothing in his hands, and he had not stepped aside. The silence stretched, and on the far side of the door the thing that called itself Lord Voldemort mistook it for fear, as Harry had known it would. "Come," the voice coaxed, soft as a hand laid on a doorframe. "You are a clever boy, James Potter. You have a wife, a future." The Potters were ever a practical family beneath the Gryffindor noise. Step away from the stairs and live to make more sons. The one I want is nothing, a prophecy, a precaution, a single small death between us. Is one child worth your everything? It was the contempt that gave Harry the last of what he needed. Not anger, he had burned through his anger at this creature years and lifetimes ago, but the cold confirmation that the thing on the path saw, even now, only a frightened young man weighing his own skin, and would walk through that door expecting exactly that and nothing else. Voldemort had spent 50 years being right about people. It had made him slow in the only way that mattered. Harry Potter stood in James Potter's body, with James Potter's wand warm and willing in his grip and 20 years of war in his hands and the locations of 6 pieces of his enemy's soul written in his memory like a map, and he answered in his father's voice, and it did not shake. "He's worth more than your everything," Harry said. "Come and take him," and the door blew off its hinges. Chapter 1 and Chapter 2. The attack. The door came in on a wave of green-edged force that should have taken a man's head off, and there was no man where the spell expected one. Harry was already moving when the frame splintered. He had spent the last second of the standoff committing his weight to the left, and so the killing curse that opened the fight, fast, silent, the color of poisoned glass, passed through the space a frightened James Potter would have filled and buried itself in the wall behind, and the plaster did not scorch or smoke. It simply died, a foot-wide circle of it, the life going out of the very paint. That was the thing about the curse no book ever told you. It did not burn, it unmade. Everything it touched stopped being alive in any sense the world recognized, down to the lichen on the stone, and the silence it left was its own kind of scream. Harry answered it before the dust had settled. He did not aim for the body. He aimed for the floor in front of the body, a blasting curse driven downward at an angle, and the boards of his father's sitting room erupted upward in a fountain of oak splinters straight into the doorway, into the place where eyes would be. It would not hurt Voldemort. It was never meant to. It bought him the half-second, and in that half-second Harry was across the room and behind the line of the overturned settle, and a second curse, his own, a bone-deep concussive thing he had learned from a dead man in a tent in a wood, was already leaving his wand. It caught Voldemort full in the chest and threw him back through the ruined doorway into the garden. For a moment there was only the wind in the broken house and the crying of the baby far above, and Harry crouched behind the settle with his heart going like a war drum and one cold, clear thought rising over all the others. He felt that. He felt that, and he did not understand it, and right now, for the first time in 50 years, Lord Voldemort is confused. It would not last. He had perhaps 3 seconds of it, and he spent them well, a disillusionment over himself, a shimmer down his outline until he was little more than a smear of the room's own light, and a quick brutal transfiguration of the fallen door into a slab of cold gray granite that he floated up to seal the gap where the doorway had been. Not to keep Voldemort out, to make him come through stone on Harry's clock in a way Harry chose. The granite exploded inward. He had expected nothing less. Voldemort came through the dust this time slowly, and there was no contempt left in the way he moved, only a terrible focused attention, and his eyes, red, slitted, lidless, swept the wrecked room and found the place where the air bent wrong around a man-shaped absence behind the settle, because of course he found it. He was the most dangerous wizard who had ever lived, and a disillusionment charm was a child's hiding game to him. "Clever," said Voldemort, and his high cold voice had changed. The silk had gone out of it. "Where did James Potter learn to throw a man across his own garden? You were a dueling club boy, a Quidditch player. I have read the file Severus keeps. You are not in it. People surprise you," Harry said from a different place than his voice should have come, because he had thrown it, an old trick, and Voldemort's first curse went into the settle and turned the oak to ash. That must be new. He came out of the disillusionment firing. What followed had no name in any of the dueling primers, because the primers were written by men who had never stood in front of this. It was not an exchange of spells, it was a flood. Voldemort cast the way other men breathed, 3 curses in the time it took to think one. The killing curse threaded between cutting hexes and a jet of black fire that ate the air it traveled through, and Harry met it the only way anyone ever had and lived. He did not block what could not be blocked, he moved, he put furniture in angles and conjured matter between himself and the unblockable and shielded only the rest, and he gave back everything he had. He drove a silver doe of pure Patronus light across the room, not a defense, a blinding white wall of it flung into Voldemort's eyes, and under its cover he transfigured the floorboards into a nest of grasping wooden hands that closed on the Dark Lord's robes and held for the half-second it took Harry to land a curse on the wand arm. He missed the hand. He scored the forearm and Voldemort hissed, and for the second time that night something crossed the white face that had not been there when it came up the path, the recognition that it could be hurt. For a moment they circled, and Harry learned the room again through the soles of his feet, the dead boards of the tripping jinx, the angle of the funneled stairs, the dark corner where a jug hung waiting. Voldemort tested him now with smaller things, probing, the way a swordsman taps a blade to feel the strength behind it. A cutting hex at the knee, a binding curse Harry shrugged off the line of his shoulder, a sudden silent conjuration of serpents that poured across the floor toward his feet. Harry burned the snakes to ash without looking at them and put a hex of his own through the smoke, and Voldemort turned it, and for the first time the Dark Lord's face showed something that was not contempt and was not yet fear but lived in the narrow country between them, the dawning, careful attention of a predator that has finally met something it cannot afford to underestimate. "You fight the way I fight," Voldemort said, and there was accusation in it. "Where did James Potter learn to fight the way I fight?" "From you," Harry said, "from watching you do it for a very long time. You're not as original as you think, Tom. Everything you are, somebody had to survive, and the ones who survived you learned." And he stopped circling and went forward. Voldemort stopped playing. Harry felt the change before he saw it, the way you feel a storm drop its pressure into your teeth. The careless 3 curses a breath rhythm broke off, and what replaced it was worse, precision. The Dark Lord planted himself in the center of the ruined room and began to cut the world apart in measured strokes, and now every spell came braided with a second meaning. A cutting hex thrown not to hit but to herd, to drive Harry left into the path of the black fire already curling there. A blasting curse aimed at the ceiling to bring the joists down across the only line of retreat. It was the dueling of a creature that had murdered for 50 years and learned every lesson murder could teach. There was no contempt in it now and no theater. There was only the cold geometry of a thing that had decided to win. Harry gave ground and read the geometry as fast as it came. He had stood inside this exact pressure before, in a marble atrium with the floor cracking under him and an old man's wand the only thing between him and the end, and the lesson of that night was burned into him below the level of thought. You do not survive Voldemort by being faster, because nothing alive is faster. You survive him by being somewhere he did not send the curse. So Harry stopped trying to answer every spell and started answering the man, watching the shoulders, the half-beat tell in the wand wrist, the flicker of the lidless eyes toward the place he meant to drive you next, and he moved a fraction before each strike instead of a fraction after. And for the space of 10 seconds, the killing magic of the most dangerous wizard in the world carved the room to splinters around a man it could not quite touch. Then Voldemort changed the game again and reached for Harry's mind. It came in under the spellfire, silent, a cold finger of pure intrusion sliding behind his eyes while his wand hand was busy. The oldest trick the creature had, to crack a man open from the inside and read the next move off the front of his thoughts before he made it. Against anyone else in that cottage, it would have ended the fight in a heartbeat. But Harry Potter had spent a wretched year of his youth learning, badly and then well, to close the doors of his own skull, taught by the cruelest teacher he ever had, and the habit had outlived the teacher and the war and his own first death. He slammed the doors. He did not build a wall. Walls told you there was something behind them. He built nothing, a flat gray blankness, a man with no thought in his head but the next foot of floor, and the cold finger met the blankness and found no purchase and recoiled. You close your mind, Voldemort said, and the surprise in it was a victory all its own. Where did a Quidditch player learn occlumency under fire? Same place I learned the rest. Harry put a severing charm through the gap the question opened and took a strip off the hem of the black robe. Hard, the black fire came then, the cursed flame that ate air and stone and would have eaten Harry too, Fiendfire's smaller, leashed cousin, a thing Voldemort could shape and steer, and it came not as a jet but as a flood rolling low across the floor to cut off the room entire. Harry could not block it. He knew what cursed fire did to shields. It drank them. So he did the one thing the histories of this night never recorded, because the man who fought this fight before had been wandless and doomed. He reached for the broken window behind him and tore the autumn night in through it, a roaring wind charm that bent the flame back on its caster for the half-second it took him to vault the burning line and put the dead hearth between them. The fire scorched up his sleeve. He smelled his own hair burning. He came down on the far side with his ribs screaming where the earlier hex had opened them and his wand already rising, and he saw his opening. Voldemort had committed to the fire. He had poured will into shaping it, into steering the flood, and for one heartbeat the wand that fed it was bound to that work, and the red eyes were on the flame and not on the man and Harry, who had been waiting through every exchange for exactly this, the single moment when an enemy who never overcommitted finally did, struck not at Voldemort but at the fire itself. He turned the cursed flood with a wrench of transfigured air straight back across the room, a wall of black flame slamming into the place where Lord Voldemort stood, and for an instant the Dark Lord was wreathed in his own cursed fire, and the scream that came out of it was the first sound of real pain Harry had ever heard that creature make. It did not kill him. Cursed fire could not kill the thing that had hidden its death in 6 far corners of the world, and Voldemort tore free of it with a backlash of force that flung Harry into the staircase and cracked something in his shoulder against the newel post. But it had cost the Dark Lord his rhythm and a measure of his certainty and a long handspan of charred and ruined robe, and when he came up out of the smoke he was no longer cutting the world apart in measured strokes. He was breathing hard, which Harry had not known he could do, and the white face was streaked with soot, and the red eyes had narrowed to slits of pure calculation. "You are not James Potter," Voldemort said. He had stopped casting. He stood in the wreck of the sitting room with the firelight stuttering across the planes of his face, and the burned settle and the dead circle in the wall and the splintered floor lay between them like the aftermath of a war fought in a single minute. His body. His wand, I can taste the mahogany of it, but not his mind. There is something behind your eyes that has seen me die. He tilted his head, that reptilian motion, and the slitted eyes narrowed. How interesting, how very interesting. What are you? It would have been so easy to answer. Harry felt the words press at the back of his teeth. I'm your ending. I'm the boy you made and the man who unmade you. I've already buried you once, and I know where you've hidden every scrap of your rotten soul, and he swallowed every one of them, because the one advantage he could not afford to spend was Voldemort's ignorance. Let the Dark Lord wonder. A confused enemy made mistakes. An enemy who knew that his Horcruxes were a map in his opponent's head would do nothing else ever but defend them. I'm the man standing between you and those stairs, Harry said. That's the only thing about me you need to learn tonight. The stairs. Voldemort's gaze went up to the ceiling, to the floor above where a child was crying and a woman's voice murmured low and steady beneath the sound of warding. The hunger came back into his face, the thing that had brought him here through the autumn dark, the prophecy and the precaution and the boy who might one day be his ending. Yes, the boy is upstairs. I can feel him. Such a small heartbeat. He smiled, and it was the worst thing Harry had seen in 2 lifetimes. You cannot hold me, whatever you are. You are good. You are better than anything I expected to find in this hovel. But I am Lord Voldemort, and I have not been good for a very long time. I have been something else. He moved. Harry had been waiting for it, had built the whole rigged room around it, and still it nearly killed him. Voldemort did not come at him. He came at the stairs, a blur of black, faster than anything human had a right to be, going not through Harry but around him, betting that a man defending a doorway would not abandon it to chase. He was right about most men. He was wrong about this one. Harry had not planted his feet to defend the doorway. He had planted them to be one step from the funnel he'd built, and as Voldemort surged toward the foot of the stairs, the angled settle that was now a heap of ash no longer mattered, but the tripping jinx laid into the boards before the hearth did, and Voldemort's flying robes crossed it, and the most powerful wizard alive went down hard across his own ankle's betrayal, sprawling, catching himself on one hand at the bottom step. Harry dropped the jug. It fell out of the dark angle by the door where it had hung all this while, the chipped blue jug of his mother's asters, and it shattered across the back of Voldemort's bowed head. Nothing, a flinch, a fleck of china and dead flowers, but the flinch turned the red eyes up and to the right for the length of a heartbeat, and into that heartbeat Harry put everything he had left in the wand and the body and the 20 years. The curse took Voldemort across the shoulder and spun him off the stairs. It should have ended it. Against any living man it would have. But the thing on the floor of his father's house was not a living man in the way that word was meant, and it rolled with the blow and came up snarling with its wand spitting light, and Harry felt the first real wound of the night open across his ribs as a cutting hex he could not fully turn went home, and the warmth of his own blood, James's blood, his blood, the line of it running unbroken from the man bleeding to the child crying upstairs, soaked hot into his shirt. There was a moment in the middle of it when Harry knew he had already won, not the duel. The duel was still a roar of light and ruin around him, but the only thing that actually mattered. It came when Voldemort, frustrated past bearing by an enemy he could neither read nor break, threw a curse at the ceiling above the stairs, meaning to bring the whole upper floor down on the woman and child he could not reach any other way, and the ceiling held. It held because Lily Potter's wards were laid into the bones of that house with a skill that even now, in the worst hour of her life, did not fail, and the killing weight of Voldemort's curse broke against her invented magic and rained down as nothing but plaster dust. Harry saw it hold and saw the flicker of disbelief cross the white face, and understood that the most dangerous wizard in the world had just been told no by a muggle-born girl he had dismissed as nothing, and that the telling had cost the Dark Lord a half-second of pure incomprehension, and that Harry intended to spend that half-second like a king's ransom. He did not look down. Looking down was how you died. He kept his wand up and his feet moving, and he gave ground deliberately toward the center of the room, drawing Voldemort away from the stairs by the only lure the creature could not resist, himself hurt, slowing a kill almost in reach. There, Voldemort breathed, advancing. There it is, you bleed. Whatever you are, you bleed, and what bleeds can be ended. Another curse, and Harry turned it into the wall, and the wall died. I will take my time with you now. I will peel the thing behind your eyes out into the light, and I will know what crawled into James Potter's skin, and then I will walk up those stairs and finish what the prophecy promised me, and your wife will watch, and then she will not watch anything ever again. The Grey wanted him. He held it off the way his mother was, even now, holding off the truth she had half seen, by refusing it room. He let Voldemort hurt him, let the curses come close, let his footing slip on the splintered boards, and all the while he counted the seconds he needed, the steps to the center of the room, the exact distance that would put the foot of the stairs at Voldemort's back and Lily's warded door at Harry's. A bleeding man retreating was the most natural thing in the world, and the Dark Lord, drunk again on the imminence of the kill, did not see that the retreat had a shape, that every staggering backward step set the board the way Harry wanted it set. You disappoint me at the last, Voldemort said, advancing through the ruin, unhurried, savoring. I had hoped the thing behind your eyes would last longer. They always last so short a time, the clever ones. They burned so bright, and then, he flicked his wand almost lazily, and a lance of white-hot pain opened Harry's thigh. They gutter. Another step. Tell me what you are before you die. I find I want to know. It is a rare night that surprises Lord Voldemort, and rarer still the man who manages it twice. Come closer, Harry breathed, sagging against the newel post, the wand trembling in a hand that was only half pretending to tremble, and I'll whisper it. Voldemort laughed, soft and cold, and came closer, because pride is a kind of deafness, and he had never in his life heard the trap closing under a voice that begged. He came to exactly the place Harry had bled and staggered and lied to bring him, the center of the room, his back to the stairs, and he raised his wand to take his time with the dying man. And that was the mistake. Not the cruelty. Harry had no room left for the cruelty. The mistake was the time. Voldemort had decided to savor it, to stretch the kill, because he was certain again, because a bleeding man giving ground was a story he had read 1,000 times and always to the same end. He had stopped trying to win quickly. He had started trying to win beautifully. Harry gave him the 10 seconds he needed by nearly dying in them. He let the next curse come closer than he ever would have in a fight he meant to walk away from clean. He let it open his arm. He stumbled, half real, half theater, against the foot of the stairs, and he heard above him the bedroom door open, because of course she had heard it. Of course Lily Potter had not sat behind her wards listening to her husband bleed for her, and his heart seized because the one variable he could not control had just walked onto the board. Stay back. He roared and meant it, and she did not, because she was him and he was her, and neither of them had ever in any life done the sensible thing when someone they loved was dying on a staircase. Lily came down 3 steps with her wand out and her face white and terrible, and the baby was not in her arms. She had left him warded in the wardrobe, the one order she had kept, and she threw a shield between Harry and Voldemort that flared gold and held for half a second against a killing curse, which no shield could do, which no shield in the world could do, except that it did for half a second because she had put something into it that was not in any book. Voldemort laughed, the mudblood witch. Severus begged me for you, did you know? He went down on his knees. He raised his wand, and his eyes were on Lily now, and Harry saw the shape of the next instant the way you see a wave already breaking. I told him I would spare you if you stood aside. I am generous. I will tell you the same. Stand aside, girl, and live, and let me have the man and the boy. No, Lily said. And Harry understood in the cold, clear place where he did his thinking exactly what was about to happen, because he had read it in his own scar 100 times. The choice she would make, the offer she would refuse, the willing death that would wrap the child upstairs in a magic older than wands. He understood it, and he refused it. He had not crossed the floor of death and the wreck of his own life and the impossible gulf of years to stand here and watch his mother die for him a second time. So he changed the equation. Lily, he said, and his voice cut through the ruin of the room, flat and certain and absolutely without fear. Listen to me. The protection isn't the dying. It was never the dying. It's the love that doesn't count the cost, offered with open eyes. We can both make that offer. Neither of us has to take it. He did not look away from Voldemort. He could not, but he reached out his free hand toward her, palm up, the way you reach for someone across the last gap in the world. Take my hand and mean it for him. Now, she took his hand. What happened then had no proper word, and Harry, who had felt the edges of this magic before in his own skin, felt it now from the inside as a thing too large for the body that held it. Where their hands met, the air went white, not the white of fire, the white of the station that was not a station, the white at the floor of everything. and it ran up both their arms and met in the center of their joined grip and poured out into the room as something with no heat and no sound and an absolute, sovereign refusal. Two people standing in the wreck of their home, both willing, both unafraid, both offering the whole of themselves for the small heartbeat in the wardrobe above, and the old magic that Voldemort had spent his long life trying to murder and outlive, rose up between them like a tide coming in over a drowning man. The light between their joined hands was not light. Harry had no better word for it, but it was not light. It was the white of the place between living and dying, the white he had walked in once with the dead all around him, and it remembered him. It poured up out of the floor of the world through the place where his palm met his mother's, and it filled the ruined room without casting a single shadow, because it was not the kind of thing that had an opposite. Where it touched the dead circle in the wall, the paint did not come back to life, but the wrongness of its dying eased, as if even the killing curse's hunger could not hold its grip in the presence of a thing this old and this freely given. The cold that had come off Voldemort all night, the kin of Dementor's chill that had crept into the marrow of the house, broke against it and could not enter. Harry felt the whole of his two lives gather behind the offer he was making, and Lily's gather behind hers, two refusals braided into one, mother and son, though only one of them knew it, both of them standing in the open door of death and saying, with everything they were, not him, not the child, take us first and you will still not have him. Voldemort cast the killing curse into it. He cast it at Harry, at the man, the threat, the thing behind James Potter's eyes, with all the contempt and all the fury and all the terror he would never name, and the green light crossed the room and struck the white, and the white did not break. It turned. Harry had a single frozen instant to see the green light fold back on itself, to see Lord Voldemort's red eyes go wide with the one expression Harry had been certain he would never live to witness on that face, not anger, not hate, but the pure animal astonishment of a creature that has just understood, far too late, that it has been wrong about something fundamental, and then the curse he had thrown went home in the throwing arm that threw it. The body of Lord Voldemort came apart. It did not fall, it did not bleed. It unmade itself the way the wall had unmade, the way the paint had died, except that there was a soul nailed into 6 far corners of the world that would not let the unmaking finish its work, and so what should have been a death became a tearing, the body shredding into black smoke, and a sound that started as a scream and went on past the range a scream could reach, climbing, thinning. A noise that rattled the surviving glass in the windows and woke every dog in Godric's Hollow, and would be talked about in the village for 40 years, as the night the devil came and was sent screaming home. The smoke that had been Voldemort tore itself in a long, ragged streamer through the broken doorway and out into the night and was gone, fleeing west toward Albania and the long crawling dark of the years between, a wraith, a wound, a thing that was not dead because it had made itself impossible to kill and now would have to live with what that had cost. And in the sudden ringing silence of the ruined sitting room, James and Lily Potter stood with their hands locked together and the white light guttering out around them, both of them alive. Harry's legs went. He did not fall so much as fold, the wand dropping from fingers that had stopped taking orders, and Lily caught him before his knees hit the floor, going down with him, both of them sinking into the splinters and the ash and the dead flowers, and the pain that he had set aside for the duration came back all at once and collected its debt. The cut across his ribs, the opened arm, a dozen lesser hurts he had not had attention to spare for. He breathed, and breathing was a knife, and he found that he was laughing anyway, a cracked and bleeding and entirely involuntary laugh, because upstairs, through the floor, muffled by the wardrobe door, the baby was still crying, still alive. Still, in every way that mattered, untouched, no curse had reached him, no rebound had marked him, no sliver of a torn and evil soul had lodged behind that small, unscarred forehead in the dark. Harry reached up with the one arm that still worked and pressed his bloody hand flat against the underside of the staircase, against the wood, as if he could feel the heartbeat through it, and he laughed, and it turned somewhere in the middle into something that was not laughing at all. James. Lily had his face in both her hands. There was blood on her, his blood, transferred from his shirt to her palms to her cheek where she pushed her hair back, and her green eyes were enormous and wet and furious and alive. James, stay with me, stay awake, you're cut to ribbons, why are you laughing? He's alive, Harry got out. He's alive, of course he's alive. Her voice cracked clean in half. Of course he is, you impossible man, you held the Dark Lord at our own front door and you're bleeding out on the floor about it. She had her wand moving over the wound at his ribs even as she shouted at him, the incantations of a healer's daughter spilling out under the fury, the bleeding slowing where the wand light passed. Don't you dare do this, not after that. Lily. He caught her wrist with his good hand. He had to make her understand the one thing before the gray came up and took him, because he did not know how much of him would still be here when it let go again. It's not over. He's not dead. He can't die yet. I have to. There are things he's done, things he's hidden. I have to find them before he... I know, she said. He stopped. She was looking at him with an expression he had no name for, the firelight and the wandlight moving on her face, and she said it again, quieter, and it went through him deeper than any curse had. I know, James, or whoever you are tonight, I felt it. When you took my hand, I felt what was in you. Her thumb moved across his cheekbone, and her voice when it came again was steady in the way of a thing that has decided to be steady through sheer force of will. There's a grown man's grief in you a mile deep, and a war I've never fought, and you knew my son's heartbeat before you ever climbed those stairs. You knew it the way I know it, like it was your own. Harry looked up at his mother's living face, and he could not lie to her. He had never in 2 lives been able to lie to her, though he had only just met her. It is my own, he whispered. Something moved across her face, not understanding, not yet. You could not understand a thing like that in a single sentence on a bleeding floor, but the door of understanding opening, the first gray light of it. Her hand went still against his cheek. Above them the baby cried on, and outside, very far off now, a motorbike engine was tearing through the night sky toward Godric's Hollow, because someone had felt the wards die and the dark thing scream and was coming, too late for the fight and just in time for the rest of it. Then you're going to live, Lily Potter said, fierce and low, deciding it, the way she decided everything that mattered. Do you hear me? Whatever you are, whatever you came back from, you held him off my son, and you're going to live to tell me how. That's the deal. That's the only deal I'm offering tonight. Her hand pressed harder against the wound, the magic of it warm and insistent, knitting him to the world 1 stitch at a time. Stay, stay with me. Help is coming. Just stay. Harry stayed. It cost him everything he had to do it, lying in the ruin of the house where in another world he had become an orphan, holding his mother's hand while she fought to keep his father's body breathing, listening to himself cry through the floorboards and refusing the gray that wanted to pull him under. But he had not come this far to let go now. He had spent his own death and a debt older than the world to buy this single impossible thing, and it was lying in a wardrobe 1 floor up, alive, and the woman who had given her life for him in another world was kneeling in his blood, refusing to let him give his back. He turned his head against the splintered floor so he could see the broken doorway, the rectangle of cold autumn night where the door had been, the first faint glow of a motorbike's headlamp dropping out of the sky. He thought of all the years that had been about to happen and now would not. He thought of the cupboard under the stairs, the years of it, and how this child upstairs would never see the inside of one. He thought of 6 pieces of a torn soul scattered across the corners of the world, intact, undefended. Their maker fled to a wraith's long convalescence in a foreign wood, with no idea that the man who knew exactly where every one of them lay was alive and bleeding and intending, the moment he could stand, to go and find them all. The motorbike came down in the lane outside in a roar of engine and a skid of gravel, and a voice Harry had not heard outside of grief in more years than he could count, desperate, cracking, calling a name into the dark, shouted, "James. Lily, James, in here, Sirius," Harry called back, and his voice came out wrecked and small, and he was smiling at the ceiling with tears running sideways into his hair. "We're in here, we're alive, all 3 of us." He heard the front gate crash open. He heard boots on the path, on the steps, sliding to halt in the ruined doorway. He heard Sirius Black make a sound that no living man should ever have to make, half a sob and half a laugh, the sound of a man who has run headlong toward the worst night of his life and found, impossibly, against every law of the world, that it had not happened. Sirius Black came through the broken doorway like a man falling into his own grave and finding it empty. He was soaked with the night and wild-eyed, and his wand was out, and he took in the wreck of the room in a single sweep, the dead circle in the wall, the charred floor, the blood, James on the ground and Lily over him, and his face did the terrible arithmetic and arrived, impossibly, at a sum that was not the one he had flown across half of England braced to find. His voice failed. He tried again. "You're alive, you're both. Harry wears, upstairs, wardrobe." "He's fine, Sirius, he's fine, he's just frightened." Lily's composure finally cracked down the middle, and the tears came, and she did not stop working over the wound for a second while they did. Sirius crossed the room and dropped to his knees in the splinters beside them and put his hand against the side of James's face as if he could not believe it was warm, and Harry, who had buried this man, who had watched him fall laughing through a veil into nothing, and had carried the whole of it for the rest of a long and grieving life, looked up into the living face of his godfather and could not say a single one of the things that crowded his throat. Sirius was young. There was no Azkaban in him yet, no gray, no 12 stolen years, only a frantic, blazing, undamaged love looking down at a friend it had been certain was dead. "What happened?" Sirius said hoarsely. "The wards died. The whole village felt something. There was a scream. James, the worst thing I've ever heard. Half of Godric's Hollow is going to be awake." "He came," Harry said, "and he left in pieces, and he's coming back eventually, and when he does we'll be ready, because this time we know everything." He gripped Sirius's wrist with the last of his strength and held the gray wolf of grief and exhaustion off for one more sentence, because it mattered that this man of all men hear it from him first. "Send word to no one but Dumbledore, not Peter, especially not Peter. Do you understand me, Sirius? Not Peter. Whatever was in his face, Sirius did not argue. He had known James Potter his whole life, and he had never heard him speak in that voice, and some animal part of him understood that the rules of the world had changed in this room tonight and that the change was not finished. He nodded slowly. "Not Peter," he repeated, and there was a question buried in it that he was too frightened to ask. And Harry Potter's son and father, traveler and ghost, the man who woke in the body of the father he had never known and refused to let the story end the way it had been written, closed his eyes in the wreck of the house at Godric's Hollow with his mother's hands keeping him alive and his own infant heartbeat crying through the floor, and let himself believe for one single breath that he had won. He had not yet. The hardest part was still ahead, and some of it would cost more than tonight had. But the family was alive, the dominoes had not fallen, and whatever came next, it would come into a world that Harry Potter had, against all the laws of grief and time, already begun to change. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, save they got the baby down from the wardrobe before they did anything else. Sirius went up, Harry could not, his thigh would not yet hold him, and he watched his godfather take the stairs 3 at a time and heard the wardrobe door open and heard, a moment later, the change in the baby's crying, the way a frightened child quiets the instant it is lifted by hands it trusts. When Sirius came back down, he was holding Harry's infant self against his shoulder with the unthinking competence of a man who had held this child 100 times, murmuring nonsense into the dark hair, and the baby had stopped crying and was hiccuping into Sirius's collar with one fist knotted in the leather of his jacket. "There he is," Sirius said, and his voice cracked on it. "There's my boy. Not a mark on him, not a mark." He put the baby into Lily's arms, and Lily into the same motion gathered the child and her bleeding husband both against her, and for a moment the three of them, 4, counting the man who lived behind James Potter's eyes, were simply a knot of people on the floor of a ruined house, breathing, alive, holding on. Harry got his good arm around the small warm weight of himself and pressed his face into the baby's hair and breathed in the smell of him, milk and wood smoke and clean child, and the thing he had held off all night finally came briefly, and he let it, because there was no curse incoming now to make grief a liability. He wept without sound into his own infant hair, and no one in that room understood why a man would weep like that over a child who had never been in his arms before tonight, and no one asked. It was a strange thing, in the lull that followed, to catch sight of himself. There was a mirror over the mantel that had survived the fight, cracked across one corner, and as Sirius carried the baby past it, Harry saw the three of them reflected, the godfather, the child, and behind them on the floor the man, and the man was not him. James Potter looked back out of the glass, the strong jaw, the unruly black hair, the hazel eyes behind the crooked glasses, the face from the photographs Harry had memorized as a boy and had never once seen move. It moved now. It was bleeding and exhausted and wet-eyed, and it was wearing Harry's expression on James's bones, and the sight of it went through him stranger than any curse. He had spent his whole first life wishing to see this face turn and look at him. He had not imagined that when it finally did, it would be from the inside in a mirror with his own grief in its eyes. He looked away. There would be time to make peace with the man in the glass, or there would not, but either way it was not a thing to do tonight with the room full of people and the work not yet begun. Then the fireplace flared, the dead flu coming back to life now that the thing that had killed it was gone, and the green flames disgorged Albus Dumbledore into the wreck of the Potters' sitting room, and the night turned a corner. Harry had braced for this. Of every reunion the night could spring on him, this was the one he had known he would have to fight, because Sirius could be managed with love and Lily with the truth, but Dumbledore could be managed with neither. The old man stepped out of the fire in traveling robes the color of a winter dawn, and his eyes went round the room in a single sweep that missed nothing, the dead circle in the wall, the cursed scorch across the floor, the granite dust, the blood, the living family where 4 corpses should have been, and Harry watched the most formidable mind in the country begin in real time to understand that the story it had come to grieve had not happened. "Lily," Dumbledore said, "James, you are alive." A pause in which a great many calculations turned behind the blue eyes. "All of you are alive, all of us," Lily said. Her voice shook only a little. "He came, James fought him, and Albus, he came apart. There was I don't have the word for what happened, I was inside it, I'll never be able to tell you properly. He's gone. Gone." Dumbledore crossed the room, and he actually knelt, in his fine robes, in the splinters and the blood, beside Harry, and his eyes went to the wound at the ribs and the wand still loose in Harry's hand, and then, last and longest, to Harry's face. "Not dead, I think you mean to say. Gone is a different word, you chose it carefully." "I did," Harry said. The two of them looked at each other, and Harry felt the old man's attention settle on him like a weight, and he understood that the fight he had been dreading was not going to be fought with curses. It was going to be fought exactly here, in the small space between 2 pairs of eyes, and Dumbledore had been winning fights like this since before Harry's grandparents were born. "James Potter," Dumbledore said slowly, "is a gifted wizard. I taught him." I watched him grow from a reckless boy into a brave man, and I have rarely been prouder of a student." He paused. "And James Potter could no more have fought Lord Voldemort to destruction in his own sitting room than he could have flown to the moon on that broomstick I see upstairs. I say that with love, it is simply true. The man who did what was done in this room tonight is a duelist of a caliber this country has produced perhaps 3 times in my lifetime, and one of those 3 is myself." Eyes did not waver. "So I find myself with a question, and I find it is not the question I came through that fire expecting to ask. The question is not how you survived. The question is, who am I speaking to?" The room had gone very still. Sirius had stopped breathing. Lily's arm tightened around the baby. Harry held the old man's gaze and made his decision in the space of a heartbeat, the way he made all the decisions that mattered, and the decision was, not yet, and not here, and not all of it. Dumbledore was the most important ally he could possibly have and the most dangerous one, a man who would spend any piece on the board for the greater good and had once spent Harry himself, and the truth handed to him whole and early was a weapon Harry could not yet predict the use of. So he gave the old man something true that was not the whole truth, because a lie Dumbledore would catch and a deflection he would respect. "You're speaking to the man who's going to keep this family alive," Harry said. "That's who, the rest of it is mine, Albus, and you're not going to like that, and I don't care. You came here tonight braced to bury them. Instead you get to help me keep them breathing. Take the trade." For a long moment Dumbledore said nothing. Then very slowly something Harry had not expected moved across the ancient face, not suspicion, not the cold turning of a strategist measuring an unknown quantity, though both of those were there, something more like wonder, something almost like grief. "You speak to me," Dumbledore murmured, "the way a man speaks who has already lost everything once and does not intend to discuss it." His eyes searched Harry's face. "I have met that voice before. I have used it myself on bad nights when I was younger and angrier than I am now. I will not press you tonight, but I will say one thing and I would have you hear it." He leaned closer, and his voice dropped so that only Harry could catch it. "Whoever you are and from wherever you have come, and I begin to form a guess that frightens me, you have done a thing tonight that I had thought no longer possible in this world. You have changed something that was written. Be very careful, my boy. The world does not like to be told it was wrong. It pushes back." Harry almost laughed. "It can push," he said. "I've got somewhere to be." But Dumbledore was not quite finished, and he turned back at the last, and the blue eyes had sharpened into the look that had made dark wizards across half a century reconsider their certainties. "One question only," he said, "and then I leave you to your wounds. The thing that happened in this room, the turning of the curse. I have felt the residue of it since I stepped through the fire, and it is very old magic, older than I am comfortable being unable to name. Lily tells me she shielded a killing curse, which is not possible, and then that the 2 of you together turned it back upon its caster, which is less possible still. I have spent a long life studying the magic that lives in the space between love and death, and I tell you honestly that I have never seen it do what it did here tonight." He paused. "How did you know it would hold?" "Because I've seen it hold before," Harry said, "from the wrong side." It was more than he had meant to give, and he saw Dumbledore catch it and turn it over and understand a little of its weight, and he saw the old man choose, deliberately, not to pull the thread, not out of incuriosity, Harry knew, but out of the rarest discipline a brilliant man possessed, the discipline to leave a door shut because forcing it open might break the thing behind it. "Time," Dumbledore said softly, almost to himself, "or something that wears its face. I will not ask again. But I will tell you what I told a different desperate soul a very long time ago, and was not heeded, and have regretted it ever since. Those who meddle in the deep currents to save what they have lost are playing a game whose rules they did not write and cannot read. You have won a hand tonight that should not have been winnable. Do not mistake it for winning the table." He inclined his head, the gesture of one strategist acknowledging another across a board neither fully saw. "Whatever you intend to do next, and I think you intend a great deal, you will not do it without me. I have buried too many of my students to stand aside now that one of them has, impossibly, come back from the place I send them." "I'm counting on it," Harry said, and meant it and distrusted it both at once. Dumbledore rose, and the moment broke, and the night filled up with the practical business of survival. Minerva McGonagall came through the door at a near run with her traveling cloak still half pinned, and she stopped dead 3 steps inside it and pressed one hand flat to her chest. "Merlins, you're alive." She said it the way a person says a thing they have to hear out loud to believe. Then, because she was Minerva McGonagall, she had her wand out and her wits back inside of 2 seconds and was already turning to the practical ruin of the situation. "The whole village is awake. Half of them are out in their gardens in their nightclothes asking each other what that scream was, and a Muggle family across the lane is on the telephone to their police as we speak. Albus, if we do not get ahead of this, it will be in the Prophet by noon and the Ministry on the doorstep by 1. Then we shall get ahead of it." Dumbledore was already drawing parchment from the air, a Patronus forming silver at the tip of his wand. "Minerva, the memories first, gently, the Muggles especially, they have had a fright and there is no need to add to it." Hagrid filled the broken doorway entire, and he had clearly run or flown the last of the way, and when he saw the living family on the floor he made a sound like a mountain weeping and had to grip the frame to stay upright. They said Professor Dumbledore sent word and it said come quick and I thought somewhat terrible. He scrubbed at his streaming eyes with a tablecloth-sized handkerchief. "Ye great brave man, James Potter, ye great brave man." And little Harry, oh look at I am not a scratch. He surged forward to gather the baby and Lily got a hand up just in time. "Gently, Hagrid, gently, he's had a fright too. Course, sorry, Lily, sorry," and Hagrid redirected the full force of his joy into the nearest armchair, which he embraced, and which did not survive the experience. Harry lay through all of it on the ruined floor and watched the Order of the Phoenix fill his father's house, and the part of him that was 40 years old and had buried most of these people ached in a way he had no attention to spare for. McGonagall, who would mourn him in a castle. Hagrid, who would carry him out of a forest, all of them young or young enough and alive and busy with the ordinary frantic work of cleaning up after a victory they did not yet understand the size of. He let himself look at each of them once, and then he put it away, because the healers had arrived and there was a wand at his ribs and a voice telling him to hold still. Sirius found him while the healers were packing their things and crouched beside him, and for once in his life had nothing to say. Harry knew that silence. He had never seen it on this face. The Sirius he had known came to grief loud, all motion and fury, but he knew it because he had worn it himself, the silence of a man holding a question he is afraid to ask because the answer might be unsurvivable. "Ask," Harry said quietly. "At the house." Sirius's voice was rough. "You said not Peter. You looked at me like James. You looked at me like you knew something about Peter. And I keep telling myself I misheard because he's been our friend since we were 11. He'd sooner cut off his own hand than." He stopped because Harry was looking at him, and whatever was in Harry's face, it did not let the sentence finish. "Tell me I misheard." "You didn't." Harry kept his voice low. This was not for the room. "I'm not going to tell you the whole of it tonight, Sirius, because I can barely hold my own head up and because there's a way this has to be done and a wrong move now ruins all of it. But I'm going to tell you one thing, and I need you to take it on the faith of 20 years of friendship, even though I can't give you the proof yet. Peter Pettigrew is the reason he knew where to find us tonight. Peter was the secret keeper. Peter sold us." Sirius went white, then gray, and Harry watched the betrayal land on him the way it had landed on Lily, except that on Sirius it landed harder because Sirius was the one who had argued for the switch, who had talked them into making small, frightened Peter the keeper instead of himself. Certain it was the perfect misdirection, certain no one would ever suspect the quiet one. The guilt of it arrived on his face in the same instant as the grief. "It was my idea." Sirius could barely get it out. "The switch, I told you both. I said use Peter. No one will think of Peter. They'll all come for me. I built the door he walked them through. You built it to save us." Harry caught his arm hard because he knew exactly where that road went, the road Sirius's mind was already starting down, the one that ended in 12 years and a veil. "You built it out of love and he poisoned it, and that is on him, not you. And if you spend 1 ounce of yourself tonight on guilt instead of on what comes next, I will hex you myself. Listen to me. We are not going to charge off and find Peter and put a wand to his throat, because that is exactly what he would expect a Black or a Potter to do, and it tips our hand. We are going to be cleverer than that. We are going to let Peter think he succeeded, that we're hidden and grieving, and we are going to take him at the time and place of our choosing, with witnesses in front of the ministry, so that no one Sirius, ever has the chance to pin a single thing on the wrong man. Do you trust me? You're not telling me everything," Sirius said. "No, I'm not." Sirius searched his face, the face of the best friend he had ever had, wearing an expression he had never seen on it, and then he did the thing that in another life he had never been given the chance to do. He chose to trust and to wait and to be clever than his grief. "All right," he said hoarsely. "Your play, but when the time comes for Peter, you'll be there," Harry said. "I promise you that. You'll be there and it'll be done right, and you will walk away from it a free man with your name clean." "I promise you that too." He did not say because in the world I come from you didn't. You walked into a trap and lost everything, and I would burn time itself before I let that happen to you again. But he thought it, looking at his godfather's young and undamaged face, and the wanting of it was so strong it frightened him. Through all of it, not one of them knew that the war they believed they had just survived a near miss of was, in fact, only now about to be won. Not everyone in the Order was content to call it a miracle and move on. Alastor Moody arrived at the ruined cottage late in that long night, stumping in past the healers on his ordinary leg with his ordinary eyes narrowed to slits, and he planted himself in front of the man he believed to be James Potter and looked at him for a long, uncomfortable moment without saying a word. Harry held the stare. He had loved this man in another life, had been trained by him and mourned him and avenged him, and it was a strange grief to stand in front of him now and be regarded as a stranger wearing a friend's face. "You fought him to a standstill," Moody said at last. "Voldemort, in your sitting room with your wife and your boy upstairs, and you walked away." A grunt. "I've fought Death Eaters for 15 years, Potter, and I've buried better duelists than you ever were for less. So either you've been hiding what you are this whole time, which makes me wonder what else you're hiding, or something happened in that house that nobody's telling me, which makes me wonder the same thing." The ordinary eye bored into him. Constant vigilance. It's kept me alive when better men died, and it's telling me right now that James Potter came out of that house a different man than went in. It's telling you the truth, Harry said evenly. I am a different man than went in. I'm not going to tell you how, Alistair, and you're not going to like that, and I'd think less of you if you let it go easily. But here's what I'll give you, and you can test it however your paranoid old heart likes. Everything I tell you about the enemy is going to come true. Every prediction, every name. Watch me for a month. If I'm a liar or a danger, you'll know, because liars and dangers don't predict the future and turn out right. And if I keep turning out right, then I've got a weapon I don't understand pointed at the right target, Moody finished sourly, and I'm fool enough to be glad of it. He held out a scarred hand. I'll watch you, Potter, don't think I won't. I'd be disappointed if you didn't, Harry said, and shook it, and felt, under the grief of being a stranger to a friend, a small and private warmth that the old man's instincts were every bit as good in this world as they had been in the last. It was near dawn before he got Lily alone. They had moved them, all of them, the whole family, to a safe house Dumbledore kept, a narrow stone cottage on a hill somewhere in the Welsh marches with words Harry could feel humming in his teeth. Before he could rest, before anything, he went and stood over the borrowed cot. The baby had cried himself out and gone under into the bottomless sleep of the very young, one fist up beside his ear, the tuft of dark hair sticking up at the back. Harry stood over him in the dark of the unfamiliar room and looked at the small, unscarred forehead, smooth, whole, no lightning bolt cut into it, no fragment of a torn soul screaming behind it in the night, nothing there at all but a sleeping child who had been frightened and was now safe. He reached down and laid 2 fingers very lightly against the baby's chest and felt the heartbeat, quick and strong and certain, and he stayed there a long while feeling it, the heartbeat that was his own, that had been about to stop tonight in every world but this one. He did not pray. He had never been a praying man in either life. But standing over the cot in the gray hour before dawn, he made something that was close enough to avow that the difference did not matter, that this child would never know the inside of a cupboard, never wake to a war already lost, never carry a scar that was someone else's death, whatever it took, whatever it cost the man standing over the cot, who was the same child grown old and come back to stand guard over his own beginning. The baby was asleep at last in a borrowed cot. Sirius had finally been persuaded to lie down in the next room, though Harry doubted he was sleeping. The healers had gone, and Lily Potter sat across a scrubbed kitchen table from the man wearing her husband's body, with 2 cups of tea going cold between them and the gray light of morning coming up in the window, and she said, "Tell me now. Lily, you said it was your own." Her voice was steady. Her hands around the cup were not. "On the floor of our house, with your blood everywhere, you looked at me, and I asked how you knew our son's heartbeat, and you said it is my own. And then a wraith that used to be the Dark Lord went screaming out of my sitting room, so you'll forgive me if I've spent the night past the point of disbelieving impossible things. Tell me now, James, or tell me you're not James. I've earned it. I shielded a killing curse with my bare will tonight because you told me how. Tell me what I shielded." So he told her. He told her all of it in the gray kitchen with the cold tea, in a low, even voice that he kept level by main force. He told her that his name was Harry, that he was her son, that he was the child asleep in the borrowed cot 1 wall away, grown and aged, and come back from the far end of a life she would now never have to give him. He told her about the world that had been, the one where Voldemort's curse had not been turned in the sitting room but had struck home, where James had died at the door and Lily had died at the cot, throwing herself between the wand and the child, the willing death he had refused to let her make tonight. He told her about the protection it had wrought, the scar, the boy who lived. He told her about the cupboard under the stairs and watched her face change and kept going because she had asked for the truth and the truth had a cupboard in it. He told her about Hogwarts and the troll and the basilisk and the dementors and the maze and the graveyard where Voldemort came back. He told her about the war, the second one, the one with no childhood left in it. He told her about the Horcruxes, 6 of them, intact tonight, scattered and undefended, and what each one was and where each one lay. He told her about Dumbledore's plan, the one Dumbledore did not yet know he had made and would make in the years to come, to raise the boy like a pig for slaughter, to let him walk into the forest and die so that the piece of Voldemort's soul lodged behind his scar could die with him. He did not tell her that part gently. He had decided on the walk to the kitchen that he would not protect her from any of it, because she was going to help him rewrite it, and she could not rewrite what she did not know, and because she was Lily Evans Potter and she had never once in either of his lives wanted to be protected from the truth. She stopped him twice while he talked, and both times it told him something about the woman his mother was. The first was at the Horcruxes. Barely finished naming them, a diary, a ring, a locket, a cup, a diadem, the snake that was not yet a snake, when she set down her cup and said, flat and fast, a piece of his soul in each. So while even one exists, the body can be killed and he doesn't die. She had gone straight past horror to mechanism, the way a healer goes past the blood to the wound. That's why you said you couldn't win tonight. You could have killed the body in our sitting room and it would have meant nothing. Less than nothing. It would have warned him, he'd have gone to ground and moved every anchor and we'd never have found them. The only reason this works is that he doesn't know I know. He held her eyes. That's the whole game, Mum, his ignorance. The day he learns what I know is the day this gets very much harder and people start to die. The second was at Snape. He had not meant to dwell on it, but she caught the name in passing and would not let it go. And so he told her that Severus Snape loved her, had always loved her, that in the world that had been her death had broken something in the man and bound him to Dumbledore's side for the rest of a bitter and secret life, spying on the Dark Lord out of grief for a woman he could not save. He watched his mother absorb it. He had braced for any number of reactions. He had not braced for the one he got, which was that her eyes filled just once and she pressed her lips together and said very quietly, "He told Voldemort to spare me, tonight. Voldemort said it on the stairs. Severus begged me for you." She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, impatient with them. "Save, oh you stupid, stupid boy." Then the steel came back. "If he's an asset, we use him carefully. He's the only person inside Voldemort's circle who has a reason to want me alive, and now I am alive, and that changes what he is to us. Don't waste him on revenge, Harry. We're going to need every advantage that doesn't have to be paid for in blood." Harry looked at his mother across the cold tea, and thought that Dumbledore himself could not have reasoned it cleaner. When he finished, the tea was stone cold and the light in the window had gone from gray to gold, and Lily had not moved or spoken in a long time. She was looking at him across the table with her green eyes, his eyes full of a thing too large to have a single name, and when she finally spoke her voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me one good thing," Lily said, when the worst of it had been told and the kitchen had gone quiet, from the other life. "You've given me all the horror of it, the cupboard, the war, the graves. Give me one good thing so I know there was some, so I know my boy had something." Harry was quiet for a moment, choosing because there had been so much. "I had friends," he said at last. "Two of them first, and then more than I could count. A boy with red hair and a hand-me-down everything, who'd have walked into fire for me and very nearly did more than once. A girl who was the cleverest person I ever met. You'd have adored her, Mum. She was all books and fierce loyalty and absolute refusal to let me be stupid. They were my family when I didn't have one. They made the cupboard years bearable just by existing on the far side of them." His voice softened, and something in it healed a little in the telling. "And there was a whole family that took me in. Red hair, every one of them, a crooked house full of love and noise and not enough money and more than enough heart. A mother who," he stopped and swallowed. "A mother who loved me like her own when I didn't have one of my own to love me. I think you'd have liked her. I think you'd have liked her very much. I think the two of you would have been terrifying together." Lily was crying again, but it was a different crying now, and she reached across and gripped his hand. "Then I'm glad," she said fiercely. "I'm glad there were people. I'm glad you weren't alone, even when you were. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure the boy upstairs has all of that in us as well. He's going to have so much, Harry. He's going to be so loved he won't know what to do with it." "He already is," Harry said. "That's the whole point. He already is. You grew up without us." Of everything he had told her, the basilisk, the graveyard, the war, the forest where he walked to his own death, that was the sentence she had caught and held and could not put down. Not the danger, the absence. Harry felt his careful composure fail at last fully, the way it had not failed even on the floor of the ruined house, because there was no enemy in the room now and nothing left to hold off, and only his mother's face looking at him across a kitchen table, understanding the one thing about his life that he had spent 40 years trying not to need anyone to understand. "Yes," he said, "in a cupboard. For a while, it got better. There were people, I had people, Mum. In the end I had so many people you'd have." His voice went. He pressed the heel of his hand against his eyes and breathed and got it back, because he was not going to do this to her. He was not going to make her carry his grief on top of everything else. "It doesn't matter now. That's the whole point. It doesn't have to happen. None of it has to happen. He's a wraith in a forest in Albania right now with no idea that everything he's hidden is sitting in a row waiting to be smashed. And I know where all of it is, and I'm going to go and smash it, and that boy in the next room is going to grow up in a house with his mother and his father and a godfather who never sees the inside of Azkaban and an uncle who—" He stopped. "He's going to grow up, that's all. He's going to have the thing I didn't. That's why I'm here. That's the only reason any of this is worth what it's going to cost." Lily reached across the table and took his hands in both of hers, exactly as she had taken his hand in the ruin of the house when the white light rose, and her grip was just as fierce. "Then we do it together," she said. "Whatever it costs, you are not doing this alone. You have never done a single thing alone in your life, even the version of your life I'll never have to watch. I can hear it in how you tell it. The people, there were always people. You're not starting now." Her jaw set in the way he was coming to know, the way that meant a decision had been made and the world had better adjust. "I'm your mother. I missed it once. I am not missing it twice. We find these things and we destroy them and we end him, all the way this time, forever. And then you tell me everything about the life you had, all of it, even the cupboard, especially the cupboard, because I am going to spend the rest of mine making sure the boy in that cot never knows what one is." Harry looked at his mother in the gold morning light, holding his hands across the cold tea, 21 years old and fierce and entirely unbroken and alive, and he understood that he had been wrong about one thing. He had thought coming back that he was here to give the gift, the saved family, the rewritten war, the childhood restored to a boy who had gone without. He had not reckoned on being given anything in return. He had not reckoned on this, his mother's hands around his and her voice telling him he would not do it alone. "All right," he said, "together. Where do we start?" Lily asked. She had pushed the cold tea aside, and there was a fierce, fixed light in her that he recognized because he had spent a lifetime seeing it in mirrors. Close to home and quiet and where the cost is lowest. Harry turned his cup in his hands. "There's a locket in a house in London, Sirius's house, as it happens his family's, though he'd sooner die than set foot in it. A man named Regulus Black, Sirius's brother, stole it from Voldemort and gave his life doing it, and nobody ever knew. In the world I came from it sat in that house for years while we tripped over it cleaning. We won't trip this time. We walk in and we take it and we destroy it, and 1/6 of the thing that came through our door tonight stops existing forever." He looked up. "And then we do it again and again, 5 more times, some of them harder than that. One of them is in a vault under Gringotts that the goblins would rather die than let us touch. One is in a school full of children. But every single one is sitting exactly where I left it in my memory, undefended, because the only being alive who could defend them is currently a draft of cold air inside a snake, and he doesn't know that the map exists." Lily was quiet for a moment, then, "And when they're all gone, then he's mortal, then he can be killed and stay killed, then it ends." Harry's voice dropped, "And the boy in the next room grows up." She reached out and covered his hand with hers, and neither of them said anything for a while, and the kettle ticked as it cooled, and somewhere in the house Sirius's restless pacing had finally gone quiet, and the family that was not supposed to be alive sat together in the gold morning and let themselves, for the length of one cup of tea gone cold, simply be alive. Outside the window, the sun came up over the Welsh hills on the first morning of a world that was not supposed to exist. And far away to the east, in the cold and the dark beneath the trees of an Albanian forest, a thing that was less than a ghost and more than a memory huddled into the body of a snake it had possessed in its agony, and felt, for the first time, a flaw in the great machinery of its own immortality, a faint and far-off wrongness, like a draft from a door it was certain it had locked. A sense that somewhere in the wide turning world one of the anchors that held its soul to life had been disturbed by hands that should not have been able to find it. It did not yet understand. It would spend the coming months learning to understand, and what it learned would frighten even it, but that was the future. And the future, for the first time since a prophecy was spoken in a Hog's Head room, no longer belonged to Lord Voldemort. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4. For knowledge, the world decided within a week that Lord Voldemort was dead. Harry let it. He could not have stopped it if he had tried. The story wrote itself, the way the best lies always do, out of what people desperately wanted to be true. The Dark Lord had gone to Godric's Hollow to kill the Potters and had been destroyed instead. The details blurred in the retelling until half the wizarding world believed the infant Harry had done it and the other half believed James had, and bonfires burned and owls crossed the country in their thousands, and strangers wept in the streets of Diagon Alley over a war they thought had ended. It had not ended. But a frightened country needed to believe it had, and a frightened country that believed the war was over would stop watching the dark corners where the war was actually hiding, and that suited Harry exactly. The Daily Prophet arrived at the safe house each morning by an owl Dumbledore had charmed to find them, and each morning it carried some new variation on the same impossible front page. The boy who lived, Potters survived, Dark Lord FALLS. Wizard in Kent had set fire to his own roof, launching celebratory sparks. Hagrid, it was reported, had been seen weeping into his beard outside the leaky cauldron and buying drinks for total strangers. There were calls in the Wisengamot for an order of Merlin, though no one could quite agree to whom it should be given, the infant or the father or the mother who had reportedly faced the Dark Lord down in her own nursery. It was a strange thing to read your own legend written wrong while you ate it. Harry read it every morning anyway, because the shape of the public lie was a thing he needed to understand and steer, and because there was a grim private comfort in it that he could not have explained to anyone but Lily. In the world he had come from, this same press had spent a decade calling him a liar and a madman before it called him a savior. He found he did not much mind being mythologized by idiots, so long as the idiots were pointed in a useful direction and away from the truth. "They've decided Harry did it," Lily said one morning, turning the paper around so he could see the artist's impression, a fat-cheeked cherub with a wand throwing back a tide of darkness. She did not sound amused. "Our son, 15 months old, they've decided he's a weapon, James. They were always going to, weren't they? That's what the prophecy made him in your world, a thing the whole side could point at." "Yes," Harry said. "And that's exactly why we let them think it for now, and exactly why we make sure it never becomes true." He folded the paper shut over the cherub. "He gets to be a boy. The legend can have James Potter and a miracle and whatever else it wants. It doesn't get him." The safe house had begun in those days to feel like something Harry had no word for, because he had never lived in one. It was small and stone cold in the mornings, and the kettle whistled flat, and the baby woke twice a night, and Sirius slept on a too-short sofa with his boots on, ready to move, and none of it was the life any of them had chosen. And yet, Harry would come down before dawn and find Lily already up with the baby on her hip, humming the song from the nursery, and Sirius would surface swearing and make a hash of the porridge. And for an hour each morning before the war talk started, the four of them were simply a household, a family, and the man who guarded it from inside its own past. Harry had spent his first childhood pressing his face to the glass of other people's families. He kept catching himself now on the wrong side of the glass, inside, holding a spoon, and the strangeness of it would stop him cold in the middle of an ordinary motion until Lily caught his eye and understood and said nothing, only passed him the baby, who would grip his finger and gum his knuckle and look up at him with green eyes that did not yet know they were his own. He let himself have those hours. He had learned the hard way in the other life that a man who fights a war without ever once setting it down does not survive the winning of it. So each morning he set it down for an hour and held his infant self and ate bad porridge with the dead who were not dead, and then he picked the war back up and went to work. He sat in the kitchen of the Welsh safe house 10 days after the attack, healed enough to move, and laid the truth out on the scrubbed table for the only 4 people in the world who would be allowed to know it: Dumbledore, Lily, Sirius, and arriving last and most reluctantly, summoned by a message that had made him come whether he wished it or not, Severus Snape. Harry had thought a great deal about how to handle this room. He had decided in the end on the same principle that had governed the night at Godric's Hollow: give them enough of the truth to make them useful, and not one word more than the situation could survive. He would not tell Snape who he really was. He would not tell Sirius the whole shape of the years that had been. He would tell Dumbledore the thing that mattered most and watch what the old man did with it, because everything downstream depended on Dumbledore choosing to be an ally rather than a manager. "He isn't dead," Harry said when they were all seated and the door was sealed and the baby was asleep upstairs under Sirius's restless half-attention. "I want to start there because the rest of this only makes sense once you accept it. The body we destroyed was a body. The thing that wore it is alive, a wraith, less than a ghost, hiding somewhere far from here and gathering its strength, and it will come back, not this year, maybe not for 10. But it will come back, and when it does it will be exactly as dangerous as it was, because it has made itself impossible to kill." "Impossible," Snape repeated. His black eyes had not left Harry's face since he entered, and there was something coiled and wary in him, a man who had walked into a room expecting a trap and had not yet located it. "Forgive me, Potter. You were a competent dueler and a worse student, and now you sit there discussing the metaphysics of the Dark Lord's survival as though you had written the textbook. A man does not learn that between one Halloween and the next." "Then satisfy my curiosity on one point," Snape said, "and I will hold the rest of my questions. The Dark Lord does not flee. In my years at his side, I never once saw him retreat from a fight he had chosen to begin. He would sooner die than be seen to run from James Potter's sitting room, and yet by every account he ran." The black eyes narrowed. "What did you do to him, Potter, that the proudest creature in the world chose flight over you?" "I made him afraid," Harry said simply. "Not of dying, he can't die, and he knows it. I made him afraid of not understanding." He walked into that room certain he knew everything in it, and he walked out having met something he had no name for, and there is nothing on this earth that frightens a thing like Voldemort more than a gap in what it knows. He didn't flee the duel, Severus, he fled the question. He held Snape's gaze, which is exactly why none of you can ever answer it for him. The day he understands what I am is the day I stop being the most dangerous thing in his world. Snape was silent. Then slowly he inclined his head, not in trust, not yet, but in the wary respect of a man who has spent his life reading other men and has just been read in return. "No," Harry agreed, "he doesn't." He let the silence sit. "You're going to have to decide, Severus, whether the how of me matters more to you than the what, because the what is this: I know how to end him. Permanently. And I'm going to need your help to do it, and the price of your help is going to be that you stop trying to work out what I am and start trusting what I know." It was Dumbledore who broke the stalemate, and he did it by speaking the word Harry had been waiting 10 days for someone to force into the open. "Horcruxes," Dumbledore said quietly. The room went still. Snape's head turned sharply. Sirius frowned, not knowing the word. And Harry felt something in his chest unknot, because he had wagered everything on Dumbledore's mind arriving at this conclusion on its own, and the old man had not disappointed him. "You've suspected since the start," Harry said. "I have suspected for some years that Tom Riddle had taken steps to anchor himself against death. I did not know how many steps. I did not know if it was one such anchor or more." Dumbledore's eyes were very grave. "I confess I had hoped never to have the conversation in which a man told me the number." "Tell me the number, Harry." The name went off in the room like a dropped glass. Sirius's head came up. Snape went rigid. Lily reached over and took Harry's hand under the table, because she had heard Dumbledore use his real name and understood that the old man had already guessed more than Harry had told him. "6," Harry said. There are 6, and tonight, right now, all 6 of them are intact and undefended, and I know where every single one of them is. He told them. Not how he knew that door stayed shut, and Dumbledore, to his eternal credit, kept it shut too, watching Harry with an expression of dawning and almost unbearable understanding, but asking nothing. Harry simply laid the 6 anchors out on the table like cards, a diary kept by Lucius Malfoy, who did not know what he held. A ring hidden in the ruin of a shack in a place called Little Hangleton, set with a cursed stone that would kill any man who put it on. A locket of Salazar Slytherin, stolen from a seaside cave by a brave and bitter young man and now sitting forgotten in a house in London. A cup of Helga Hufflepuff's, locked in the deepest vault of the Lestrange family beneath Gringotts. A lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaws, gathering dust in a room at Hogwarts that only revealed itself to those in need. And the snake, not yet, he stressed, not yet a Horcrux, but the creature he would make into his final anchor in the years to come if those years were allowed to happen. And the boy, said Dumbledore. Harry had known it was coming. He had known it from the moment he saw Dumbledore's face change at the word 6, because Dumbledore was the only person in the room with the pieces to assemble it, that the prophecy had marked the child, that the curse had been turned, that in some other accounting of this night the curse might not have been turned at all. The old man's voice when he spoke again was gentle in a way that was almost worse than coldness. In the world you remember, Dumbledore said, the world where the curse was not turned, the boy survived. A child cannot survive the killing curse, Harry, not even shielded by a mother's sacrifice, not survive it whole. Something would have to happen to the fragment of soul torn loose in the act of murder in a house with a living child in it and its maker's body destroyed. He closed his eyes. There would have been a 7th, an accident, one its maker never knew he made. Yes, Harry said, you. It was barely a breath. You were the 7th. Lily's hand tightened on his until it hurt. Across the table, Snape had gone the color of old paper, and Sirius was looking between them all with the expression of a man watching a language he did not speak destroy people he loved. In that world, Harry said steadily, yes. A piece of him lived behind my scar for 17 years, and the only way the war could be won was for me to let him kill that piece, which meant letting him kill me. I walked into a forest and I let him do it. It worked. I came back. Not everyone who walked into that war did. He drew a breath. That's the world I'm here to make sure never gets written. There's no 7th now. The curse never touched the boy. He's exactly what he looks like, an ordinary child who's going to grow up. The only Horcruxes in the world tonight are the 6 on this table, and we are going to find them, and we are going to destroy them, and we are going to do it before the wraith in the woods ever recovers enough to notice they're gone. That's the whole war, gentlemen. 6 objects and a head start. I intend to spend the head start well. For a moment no one spoke, then Snape, in a voice scraped raw, asked the only question that mattered to him. And Lily, in that world, the world you came from, he could not look at her. Did she live? The kitchen held its breath. No, Harry said. He would not lie about this. He had decided that too. She died at the cot. She put herself between the wand and the child, and the protection it made is what let the boy survive. She died for him, Severus. He paused. She's alive tonight because I refused to let her make that trade twice, and because on the stairs the Dark Lord hesitated half a second over killing her, and he hesitated because someone had asked him to spare her. Snape's eyes closed. When they opened again, something in them had changed, the long, bitter coil of him loosening into something that looked almost like the boy he must once have been, the one who had loved a red-haired girl on a Cokeworth playground before the world taught him to hate. What do you need? Snape said. It was, Harry would think later, the moment the war actually turned, not at Godric's Hollow, not in the white light of the turned curse, but here, in a Welsh kitchen, when Severus Snape stopped being a man grieving a woman he had failed to save and became a man with a woman left to protect. Lily had been right. He was the only being inside Voldemort's circle with a reason to want her alive, and now she was alive, and the calculus of his whole secret life had just been rewritten in her favor. 3 things, Harry said. First, when the wraith comes looking for its old servants, and it will, you'll be among the first it calls. I need you exactly where you'd otherwise be, inside, trusted, reporting to Albus. The difference is that this time you'll know what you're looking for. You'll know the moment he starts to suspect his anchors are being touched. Second, I need you to keep brewing whatever poisons and antidotes Albus asks for, and ask no questions about why. And third, he looked at Snape steadily, I need you to never, under any circumstances, tell anyone that James Potter came back from the dead talking like a man twice his age. The whole of this depends on the enemy's ignorance, yours included for now. Can you carry that? I have carried worse, Snape said, for less. They turned then to the practical shape of the thing, and here Harry found the limits of his own foreknowledge pressing back against him, because knowing where a Horcrux lay was a different thing from knowing how to kill it. You can't simply destroy them, he told the room. A Horcrux fights back. It has to be damaged past any magical repair, destroyed so thoroughly that the soul fragment can't survive the wreckage of its container. There are only a few things in the world that do that. Fiendfire, cursed fire, does it, but fiendfire is a living thing that hates its caster and would as soon turn and eat the lot of us as do as it's told, and I'll use it only if there's no other way. The cleaner way is basilisk venom. There's no magic in the world that mends what basilisk venom destroys. And where, Snape said dryly, does one acquire basilisk venom on short notice? There's a basilisk under this school. Harry nodded at Dumbledore. Under Hogwarts. In a chamber Salazar Slytherin built and sealed 1,000 years ago that opens only to Parselmouth. It's alive right now, asleep in the dark beneath the castle, and it will be the death of a great many people if it's ever woken by the wrong hands, but it can be the death of Voldemort's soul if it's woken by the right ones. He saw Dumbledore go very still. I know how to open it, Albus. I can't explain how I know without telling you things I'm not ready to tell. But I can open the Chamber of Secrets, and I can get the venom, and there's a sword in your office, Gryffindor's sword, goblin-made, that takes in only that which makes it stronger. Bathe it in basilisk venom and it becomes the cleanest Horcrux-killing blade in the world. That's how we do it. The sword and the venom, and where those won't reach the fire. Dumbledore was quiet for a long moment. You are asking me, he said, to allow a basilisk to be roused beneath a castle full of children. I'm asking you to let me kill one before anyone has to die from it. In the world I came from, that chamber was opened by an enemy, and a child nearly died, and I killed the basilisk at 12 years old with that same sword, and a great deal of luck I'd rather not repeat. Harry held the old man's eyes. I'd like to do it this time as a grown man on our schedule, with the school asleep and the corridors cleared and you standing behind me. It's the safest version of a thing that is going to happen one way or another. Let me do it the safe way. It was the argument that reached him. Harry had chosen it for that. Dumbledore inclined his head slowly, the gesture of a man conceding a point he did not enjoy conceding. Half-term, he said. The castle empties in 3 weeks. We will do this thing then when there is no child within a mile of it. Until then the sword stays in my office and the chamber stays shut. His eyes glinted. And you, Harry, will spend those 3 weeks teaching an old man everything you are willing to teach him about an enemy you appear to know better than I know myself. Gladly, Harry said. There was one more piece, and Harry left it for last, and he addressed it to Sirius because it was Sirius's to carry. Peter, he said, Sirius's jaw set. They had not spoken of it again since the first night, but it had sat between them every day, a wound neither would touch. He thinks he won, Harry said. He thinks he handed us to the Dark Lord, and the Dark Lord destroyed us, and that he's a hero of the cause hiding among heroes of the other side, waiting to see which way to jump now that his master-esque gone to ground. Right now he's the most useful thing we have that he doesn't know he is, because the wraith, when it stirs, will reach for the servant it last gave an order to. Peter is the thread that leads back to Voldemort, so we don't touch him, not yet. We let him think he's safe. We watch him. And when the moment comes, and I'll know the moment, we take him in the open, with the ministry watching and witnesses on every side, and we make him confess what he did with his own mouth, so that no one ever can hang the wrong man for it. He held Sirius's gaze. Can you live next to him until then? Can you shake his hand and not kill him? Sirius was a long time answering. For you, he said at last, hoarse. For Harry. For the version of any of this where it comes out right. He exhaled. Yeah, I can wait, but James, and here the old reckless grin surfaced through the grief ghost of the man he was supposed to be. When we take him, I want to be the one who says hello. You will be, Harry said. I promised you that already. The meeting broke not long after, the conspirators scattering into the gray afternoon. Snape lingered at the door after the others had gone ahead, and Lily followed him out into the cold, and Harry, who could have stopped her, and did not, watch through the window as the two of them stood a little apart on the frosted grass, the woman and the man who had loved her since they were children in a gray northern town. He could not hear what was said. He did not try. But he saw Snape's rigid shoulders, and he saw Lily reach out after a while and touch the sleeve of the man who had, in another world, spent the rest of his life mourning her, and he saw Snape look down at her hand as though it were the only warm thing in a long winter. Whatever passed between them, it was not the rekindling of anything. Lily's heart had been spoken for since a boy with messy hair made her laugh against her own better judgment, and that had not changed. It was something quieter and perhaps harder, a debt acknowledged, a grief set down, an old wound given at last, the chance to heal clean instead of festering for 20 years into the shape of a spy's bitter loyalty. When she came back in, her eyes were bright, and she said only, he'll do it, for the right reasons this time. And Harry, who knew exactly what those right reasons had cost in the world that was gone, said nothing and was glad. Snape vanishing back to whatever shadows he lived in with a last unreadable look at Lily, Dumbledore disapparating with the air of a man who had aged 5 years in an hour, Sirius going up to check on the baby, because he could not seem to stop checking on the baby. In the days that followed the meeting, the war became, of all things, a household. It moved into the safe house and would not leave. The scrubbed kitchen table that had held the locations of 6 Horcruxes now held Snape's maps and Dumbledore's lists, and the slow, patient work of taking an enemy's whole hand apart, and the 4 of them, 5 when Dumbledore came, 6 when Snape's shadow slid in out of the night, bent over it night after night, and built the campaign that would end the war. Harry ran it the way he had learned to run things in the other life, which was to say badly at first and then well, delegating, trusting, refusing to carry every piece himself the way the boy he had been would have tried to. Lily took the logistics and the healing and the cold-eyed planning that even Dumbledore admired. Sirius took the field work and the morale and the baby, in roughly that order, and was extraordinary at all three. Snape brewed and spied and said cutting things that everyone slowly stopped minding. And in the middle of it every morning there was an hour that belonged to none of the war, the porridge, the baby on Lily's hip, the song from the nursery, the ordinary impossible warmth of a family that should not have existed. Harry had told himself, coming back, that he would not let himself want it because wanting it would make the rest unbearable. He had been wrong about that, the way he was wrong about most of the things he told himself to keep from breaking. He let himself want it. He held his son every morning and ate bad porridge with the dead who were not dead, and he understood more clearly with each passing day that this, not the duel at Godric's Hollow, not the hunt, not the kill that was coming, this ordinary hour was the actual victory, the thing all the rest was only the price of. He had come back to build exactly this. He intended to be worthy of it, however much time he was given to try. The 3 weeks that followed were the strangest of either of Harry's lives, because he spent them teaching Albus Dumbledore the future. They met in the evenings, after the baby was down, in the warded study of the Welsh cottage with a fire going and a pot of tea that Dumbledore insisted on and never finished. And Harry, who had grown up on stories of this man and then grown older on the harder truths beneath the stories, sat across from him and emptied the next 2 decades onto the table between them, piece by careful piece. He told him which of the captured Death Eaters were lying. Igor Karkaroff would buy his freedom with names, most of them true, and would run when the names ran out. Antonin Dolohov, Travers, Mulciber, the Lestranges in their cold devotion, Bellatrix would never break, never bend, would go to Azkaban singing her master's name and come out 15 years later worse. He told him about the ones still walking free behind respectable faces, Lucius Malfoy, who would plead the imperious curse and be believed, and who held a diary he did not understand. Barty Crouch's son, who would be caught and sent down and smuggled out under his own father's nose. He told him about a rat in the Weasley family's care that would sleep in a boy's bed for 12 years. He named them all, the long roll of the war's second half, and Dumbledore listened without once interrupting, his half-moon spectacles catching the firelight, and made no notes, because a man does not write down the things he means to keep most secret. "You understand what you are giving me," Dumbledore said at last, on the 3rd such evening. "You are giving me the power to act against men who have as yet done nothing, to move against the future before it arrives. That is a very great power, Harry, and a very dangerous one, and I have not always trusted myself with power of that kind. I know exactly what I'm giving you." Harry met his eyes across the fire. "I've read what you do with power, Albus, the good and the bad of it, more of it than you'd be comfortable knowing. Giving it to you anyway, because the alternative is hoarding it myself and becoming the thing I came back to stop. But understand me, I'm watching. The first time you decide a child is a price worth paying for the greater good, you and I are going to have a very different conversation." Something moved behind the old man's eyes, a flinch so slight that only a man who knew exactly where to look would have caught it. "You speak," Dumbledore said softly, "as though you have already had that conversation with me." "I have, you just weren't alive for your half of it." Harry let that sit and watched it land and did not soften it. "I forgave you in the end, for what it's worth, but I'm here to make sure the version of you sitting in front of me never does the thing I forgave. That's a better outcome for both of us." There was one conversation Harry had been putting off, and on one of those firelit evenings he made himself begin it, because it was the one piece of foreknowledge that could ruin them all if he handled it wrong. "The Elder Wand," he said. Dumbledore went very still in his chair by the fire. It was not the stillness of a man who did not understand. It was the stillness of a man who had hoped never to hear those 2 words spoken aloud in his own study. "You possess it," Harry went on, quiet and certain. "You won it from Grindelwald in the duel in 45, the wand that's passed down a road of murder for 1,000 years, the most powerful wand in the world, and you've kept it secret and used it gently and told yourself that the line of conquest ends with you, that when you die in your bed undefeated its power dies with you." He held the old man's eyes. "In the world I came from, that's not how it went. You were dying anyway, the ring's curse, the one I'm going to keep you away from this time, and you arranged your own death to master the wand cleanly, and it went wrong, and it spent years passing through the wrong hands and very nearly into the worst hands of all. I ended up its master in the end, by an accident neither of us could have planned. I never wanted it. The day the war was over I put it back where it could do the least harm, and I have never once been sorry." Dumbledore was silent for a long moment, the firelight moving on his half-moon spectacles. "You tell me this," he said at last, as a warning. "I tell you this so that you stop carrying it like a secret shame and start carrying it like a tool. Hide it better. Use it for the war and then put it somewhere it can sleep. And Albus," Harry leaned forward, "the day will come, years from now, when you'll be tempted to do something clever and tragic and noble with your own death to control where that wand goes. Don't just die old and undefeated in a soft bed with your family around you and let the thing's power break on an ordinary ending. That's how you actually beat it, not by mastering the line of conquest, by being the first holder in 1,000 years who simply got to grow old and stop. Something worked in the old man's face, some private grief Harry knew the shape of but did not name aloud: a brother, a sister, a duel on a summer's day, a lifetime of penance. You know a great deal about my temptations, Dumbledore said softly, for a man wearing the face of my student. I know a great deal about everyone's temptations. It's the one thing the future is actually good for. Harry's voice gentled. I'm not here to judge you for them, Albus. God knows I had my own. I'm here to make sure none of us get the chance to indulge them. That's the whole job, saving people from the future versions of themselves. It was the closest they ever came in those 3 weeks to the whole truth. On another evening they spoke of Severus Snape, because Harry needed Dumbledore to understand the man as Harry understood him, and not as the cold, suspicious thing the headmaster half-trusted and wholly watched. He's the bravest man I ever knew, Harry said, and watched Dumbledore's eyebrows climb toward his hairline. I know how that sounds. In the world I came from I hated him for most of my life. He was cruel to me, petty, unfair, and I had no idea, none, what he was carrying underneath it. He spied on Voldemort for 16 years with a noose around his neck the entire time, alone, unthanked, hated by both sides, and he did it for one reason, because he had loved my mother since they were children and she had died, and protecting her son was the only way left to honor her. He died for it in the end, murdered on Voldemort's order, still loyal, still spying, and the last thing he did was give me the truth I needed to win. Harry's voice was quiet. Lily's alive now. That changes everything for him. The grief that twisted him into that bitter secret shape never happens. You get to have the brave man without the bitterness, Albus, if you treat him right, trust him. Not blindly, he'd hate that, and so would I, but really, he's earned more trust than anyone in this war will ever know to give him. Dumbledore was quiet for a long while. I have always trusted Severus, he said at last, and never quite liked him, and never let him see the trust for fear it would soften an edge I found useful. You are telling me the edge cost him more than it was ever worth. I'm telling you the edge cost him his whole life. Let him put it down. He doesn't have to be a weapon anymore. None of them do. That's what winning early actually means. All the people who became weapons in my world get to just be people in this one. Dumbledore did not press past it, but he was gentler after that, in a way Harry had not expected, as though the knowledge that he had been weighed by someone who had seen the end of him and chosen, despite everything, to come back and save him had reached some old and lonely place in the man that nothing else ever touched. On the last evening before half-term, they spoke of the prophecy. You should hear it, Dumbledore said, the whole of it. You have, I think, lived your life in its shadow without ever being permitted to read the thing entire. I know it, Harry said, word for word. I heard it from your own memory in your office when I was a boy in the other world. And he recited it low and even, the words that had cost his parents their lives in one accounting and shaped his own in both. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord, born as the 7th month, died, marked as his equal, neither able to live while the other survived. He spoke it to the end, and the fire crackled, and Dumbledore listened to a prophecy he had carried in secret for a year and a half, spoken back to him by the very child it concerned, now wearing the face of the child's father. It still names him, Dumbledore said quietly when he had finished. The boy upstairs, born as the 7th month, died, marked by the Dark Lord that night when he came for him. Marked, Harry shook his head, but he wasn't, was he? Not this time. The Dark Lord came and he chose me, the man at the foot of the stairs, and he never reached the cot, never raised his wand at the child, never gave him a single scar. The prophecy said he'd mark him as his equal. He didn't. He fled from a man he couldn't understand, screaming with his body in ribbons, and the boy slept through the end of it without a mark on him. Harry leaned forward. A prophecy isn't a sentence, Albus. It's a weather report. It tells you what's coming if nothing changes. We changed it the night it was supposed to come true. It didn't, because the one person in the world who knew it word for word was standing in the way. It spent, it named a path, and we didn't walk it. That child up there is just a child now. He has no destiny. That's the gift. That's the whole gift. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment in the firelight, and what was in his face was something Harry had never once seen there in the other life, not in any memory, not in any portrait, a kind of peace. Do you know, the old man said, I have spent a great many years believing that the future was a thing to be managed, mourned, and survived. I think you may be the first person ever to make me believe it could be saved. He rose and set his untouched tea aside, and at the door he paused. Get some rest, Harry. Tomorrow we go down into the dark for the first of them. I find to my considerable surprise that I am almost looking forward to it. That last night, after Dumbledore had gone and the house had gone quiet, Harry sat alone at the scrubbed table with the fire burning low and felt the size of what he had set in motion. He had a map of his enemy's soul. He had the cleverest witch of her generation and the most powerful wizard alive, and a spy at the heart of the enemy's house, and a godfather who would walk into fire for him. He had one day off now, a sword in a chamber, and the real beginning of the hunt. And he had, sleeping upstairs, the single reason all of it was worth doing, a child with an unmarked forehead who was going to grow up in a world that no longer had a place in it for the war that had eaten Harry's own childhood whole. It was more than he had ever had. It was, very nearly, everything. He should have known better than to let himself feel it. Because far to the east, in the dark beneath the trees, the wraith that had been Lord Voldemort had stopped merely surviving and begun slowly to think, and the first thing it thought about was the impossible draught of cold from the door it had been certain was locked, and the second thing it thought about was the man in the cottage who had fought like no James Potter had any right to fight, and somewhere in the long patient dark, a suspicion took root that should not have been possible and began to grow. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5. Hunting Horcruxes. The entrance to the Chamber of Secrets was a girl's lavatory on the second floor, and Harry stood in front of a tarnished tap shaped like a serpent with the sword of Gryffindor on his back and tried to remember how to make a sound that the human throat was not built to make. The castle was empty around them. Half-term had hollowed it out. The students were gone home to their celebrating families, the corridors dark and echoing, and the only living things within a mile of the lavatory were Harry, Albus Dumbledore standing grave and watchful at his shoulder, and Sirius leaning against the door with his wand out in an expression that said he still did not entirely believe any of this was real. They had argued about Sirius coming. Harry had lost. There was no power on earth that would have kept Sirius Black at home while James Potter went down into the dark, and Harry had stopped pretending otherwise. "In the world I came from," Harry said, "a boy opened this by accident, hearing a snake and not knowing he wasn't speaking English. I have to do it on purpose, in cold blood, mimicking a sound I only ever heard from the wrong side of a scar." He breathed. "If I get it wrong, it stays shut. If I get it right, we are about to go down into the dark with a 1,000-year-old monster that kills with a look. Last chance to wait up here, Albus." "At my age," Dumbledore said mildly, "one grows reluctant to miss things. Open it, Harry." Harry looked at the engraved serpent, and he reached back through 20 years and 2 lifetimes for the memory of a hissing he had once produced without understanding, and he opened his mouth and let the sound come out of it, sibilant, wrong, scraping up out of some place language did not usually live. The tap glowed white. The basin sank away into the wall, and where it had been a pipe gaped, wide enough to swallow a man, breathing up cold air that smelled of deep water and old death. "Charming," said Sirius, peering into it. "After you." They went down. The slide ended in the litter of small bones beneath the school, a tunnel of dripping dark stretching away under the lake, and Harry led them through it with the sword loose in his grip, and the memory of the way burned into him from a night when he had been 12 and terrified and alone. He was none of those things now. He moved fast and sure, and Dumbledore came behind him with his wand throwing soft light and his face unreadable, and Sirius brought up the rear muttering about the Dacre, and they came at last to the round door ringed with carved serpents that was the threshold of Slytherin's chamber. Harry hissed it open. The chamber beyond was as he remembered it and worse, the long hall of pillars wound with stone snakes, the green underwater light, the towering statue of Salazar Slytherin's face at the far end with its mouth still gaping where, 1,000 years ago, its master had set the safeguard of his bloodline to sleep. Water lay in a thin black sheet across the floor. And somewhere in the dark behind that stone mouth, something vast and ancient stirred, woken by the sound of Parseltongue uncoiling toward the only meal that had come its way in a decade. "Eyes down," Harry said sharply. "Both of you, do not look at it directly, not even the reflection. Its gaze is death, instant, no cure. Watch its shadow on the water, watch my back, and whatever happens, do not let it look at you." He drew the sword. The goblin's silver caught the green light and threw it back cold. "This part's mine, I've done it before." The basilisk came out of the statue's mouth like a green river pouring upward into the world. It was longer than Harry remembered, longer than the train that had brought him to this school, scales the color of poison and a body thick as an oak, and it filled the chamber with the sound of itself, the dry slither of a thing built before mercy was invented. Harry did not look at the eyes. He had told the others to watch the water, and he watched it himself, the monstrous shadow swinging across the black sheet of the floor, and when the shadow lunged he was already moving, throwing himself flat as a mouthful of dagger teeth closed on the pillar where he had stood and cracked the 1,000-year-old stone like a biscuit. What followed was not a duel. A duel had rules. This was butcher's work in the dark, a man with a sword against a thing the size of a cathedral, and Harry fought it the way he had learned to fight everything, by being somewhere else when the killing came, and by knowing from a terrible night long ago the single fact that mattered: the only soft place on a basilisk is the roof of its mouth. The trouble came when the thing stopped striking at Harry and turned, with the cunning of something very old, toward the easier prey at the edges of the hall. Sirius, down. Harry roared because the great wedge head was swinging toward the doorway where Sirius crouched, and a basilisk did not need to bite to kill. It needed only to be met, eye to eye, for the length of a heartbeat. Sirius threw himself flat behind a fallen pillar, and the monster's lidless yellow gaze swept the stone above him, searching, and Harry understood that in another few seconds it would find one of them looking, and that would be the end. Fawkes came then, the first time. The phoenix burst into the chamber in a column of flame and went straight for the monster's face, talons spread and tore, and the basilisk reared back shrieking with twin fountains of black blood where its killing eyes had been, blinded, robbed of the one weapon that made it more than merely enormous. It was still vast. It was still death by the ton. But it could no longer kill with a look, and a blinded snake, however ancient, is a snake that must find you by sound and scent and the tremor of your feet on the stone, and Harry Potter had spent 2 lifetimes learning how to be where the killing blow was not. Now it's a fair fight, Harry breathed and stepped out into the center of the chamber and began deliberately to make noise. He let it come at him. He stood his ground in the center of the chamber with the shadow swelling on the water, every nerve screaming to run, and at the last instant, when the great mouth opened wide enough to take him whole, when the venom-wet fangs each as long as his forearm came scything down, he did not dodge. He drove the sword up two-handed with the whole weight of James Potter's strong young body behind it, straight through the roof of the monster's mouth and into the ancient brain above. A fang went through his arm on the way down. He felt it punch through the meat of his forearm and out the other side, felt the basilisk's death spasm wrench the sword nearly out of his grip, and then the vast body crashed down across half the chamber and lay twitching, and Harry staggered back with a fang, the length of a knife buried in his arm and the venom already burning a black road toward his heart. Harry Sirius was there, and Dumbledore, faster than a man his age had any right to be, and Harry went down on one knee in the black water with the world graying at the edges, because basilisk venom killed in minutes and there was only one thing in the world that healed it. "It's all right," Harry got out, even as the burning climbed. "It's all right, Phoenix, Albus the Phoenix," and Fawkes came again. The Phoenix dropped out of the green dark where he had been circling since he blinded the beast, and he settled on Harry's ruined arm and bent his head and wept, and the pearl-thick tears fell into the wound, and the black road of the venom stopped and reversed, and the agony drained away like water finding a crack. Harry knelt in the dark with the Phoenix's tears healing him and his arm knitting closed and laughed, a cracked, exhausted, entirely alive laugh, because in the other world this exact rescue had saved a 12-year-old's life, and here it was again, the same bird, the same mercy, finding him across the years. "You planned that," Sirius accused, half hysterical with relief. You let it bite you, you knew the bird would. I hoped the bird would." Harry got to his feet, swaying, the fang pulled free and clutched in his good hand, dripping. "There's a difference. Now help me harvest this thing before the venom dries. We came for a reason." They came up out of the chamber 2 hours later with the sword of Gryffindor bathed and singing with absorbed venom, a fang the length of a dagger, and a stoppered flask of clear poison that could unmake anything magic had ever made. Harry climbed back into the empty lavatory, filthy and bloodless, pale and grinning, and he held up the flask to the candlelight and watched the venom catch the flame and thought, one weapon. Now the work begins. Far to the east, beneath the trees, the Wraith felt nothing yet, but the Wraith would not stay ignorant much longer. The locket was first, because Harry had promised it would be first, and because it was the one that would cost a friend. Went to Grimmauld Place at night, the three of them and Lily, who had refused to be left at the safe house with the baby, and had instead handed the baby to a delighted and terrified Hagrid for the evening and come along with her wand and her field healer's bag. Number 12 rose up between its muggle neighbors like a bad memory, and Sirius stood on the pavement outside the house he had run away from at 16 and looked at it with naked loathing. "I swore I'd never come back here," he said. "I know." Harry put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to go in, but your brother died for what's inside, Sirius, and nobody ever knew, and I think you should be there when we make it mean something." Sirius turned to stare at him. "Regulus, Reg died running. He got in over his head with the Death Eaters and they killed him. That's all anyone. That's the story," Harry said quietly. "It isn't what happened. Come inside and meet the only witness who knows the truth." The witness was Creature. He came shuffling up out of the dark of the old house, the ancient house elf, muttering his litany of blood traitor curses at Sirius out of habit, and stopped dead when Harry knelt down in front of him and spoke a name the elf had not heard a living soul say with kindness in 15 years. "Creature," Harry said, "I've come about Master Regulus, about the locket he gave you, about the cave and the water and the order he gave you that you've never been able to obey." The elf's enormous eyes filled, and what came out of him then was a story Sirius Black had never heard and would never forget. Regulus, the younger brother, the good son, the one who had run toward the Death Eaters instead of away. Regulus learning what his master had done with Creature, the cruelty in the cave, the elf left to die to test a hiding place. Regulus, sickened, turning, taking Creature back to that cave and drinking the poison himself so the elf could take the locket and escape. Regulus dragged down into the black water by the dead while Creature disapparated with Slytherin's locket, and an order he could not fulfill, destroy it, because no magic the elf possessed could so much as scratch it. By the end of it, Sirius had sat down hard on the bottom step of his family's staircase with his face in his hands. He turned, Sirius said, muffled. Reg turned. He died trying to bring him down. "And I spent the last 10 years thinking my brother was one of them. He was braver than anyone ever knew." Harry took the locket from Creature's trembling hands, the heavy gold thing, Slytherin's serpentine S worked in green stones, humming with the wrong kind of life, and he laid it on the cold stone floor of the hall, and he drew the sword. And tonight we finish what he started. Creature, your master gave you an order you could never carry out alone. Watch, we're going to carry it out for him. He destroyed the locket the way the book said it had to be destroyed. He made it open. He hissed at it in the parcel tongue that still scraped wrong out of his throat, and the locket's gold doors sprang wide, and the thing inside came boiling out, a black tide of smoke and a voice like oil, the fragment of Voldemort's soul rising to defend itself the only way it knew, with cruelty. It showed them things, it always showed you the thing you could least bear, and it spoke, in Voldemort's high cold voice, promising them all the futures where they failed. The locket fought the way all of them fought, but it fought hardest of any because it was Slytherin's own, and the soul in it was older and crueler than the rest. The black tide rose up out of the open gold and took shape, and it did not show them one thing each and move on. It lingered, and it twisted the knife. It made Sirius watch his brother drown again, slowly, the boy's hand reaching up out of black water that would not let him rise. It made Lily stand in a nursery she had never died in and watch the green light strike a cot, and hear a child scream and be unable to move. And it turned last to Harry, and it knew exactly where to cut, because the cruelest thing in the world is a fragment of the man who took everything from you, wearing your own losses like a coat. It showed him every face he had buried. It showed him the cupboard and the long years of not being wanted, and then it showed him the thing he feared most of all, a small, dark-haired boy growing up alone, unloved, the gift undelivered, the rescue failed, the whole desperate journey backward through death come to nothing. He's lying to you, Harry said to Sirius, to Lily, to himself, and his voice did not shake. It's what they do. They show you the loss because they have nothing else. They can't show you the morning or the porridge or the heartbeat under your hand, because those are the things he never had and never understood. He only ever had the dark. Don't let a dead man's nightmare tell you what's real. He raised the sword over the writhing gold. What's real is upstairs asleep. What's real is the four of us standing in this hall. This, the blade came up, is just the last lie of a thing that's already lost. None of it's real, Harry said, and brought the sword down. The shriek that came out of the locket as the goblin's silver split, it was the same shriek the body had made at Godric's hollow, smaller, thinner, a fragment dying instead of the whole, and then it was gone, the smoke collapsing into nothing, the gold lying split and silent and dead on the floor, and 1/6 of Lord Voldemort had ceased to exist in the world forever. Creature wept when the locket died. The old elf had carried his failure for years, the order he could not obey, the master he could not avenge, the thing he could not destroy, though he had beaten it and bitten it and burned it in the dark of the house he haunted alone. And now it lay split and silent on the floor, and the impossible task was finished, and Creature sank down beside the ruined gold and pressed his face to the cold stone, and made a sound of grief and release that was almost too much to listen to. Harry knelt beside him. He'd be proud of you, he said quietly. Regulus, you did the thing he died for. It took longer than either of you thought, and it took some help, but you did it, Creature. You kept the locket safe from everyone until the day it could finally be destroyed. He couldn't have asked for a better servant. Nobody could. The elf looked up at him with streaming eyes, and something in the ancient bitter face cracked open, and from that night Creature was theirs, not bound and resentful as he had been to the House of Black, but devoted with the fierce whole heart of a creature that has, at the very end of a long loneliness, been told that its grief meant something. He would cook for them. He would guard the baby like a dragon over gold. And he would never, to the end of his long elvish life, let anyone speak ill of Master Regulus in his hearing, which no one ever again had cause to do. In a forest in Albania the wraith screamed. It came without warning, the first of them, a tearing somewhere below the level of the body it no longer had, a piece of its own self ripped suddenly and violently out of existence, and the thing that had been Voldemort convulsed in the dark and did not understand. A Horcrux, one of its anchors. Gone, impossible. They were hidden where no one could find them, hidden behind defenses and in places no living soul knew, and one of them had just been destroyed as cleanly as a man snuffs a candle. The wraith hung in the dark and felt the new and terrible smallness of itself, 5 where there had been 6, and for the first time in 50 years, Lord Voldemort felt the cold touch of something he had spent his whole life making himself immune to. Fear. The ring was second, and it was the one Harry had dreaded, not for its defenses but for its temptation. It lay in the ruin of the Gaunt house, a derelict shack rotting in a thicket above the village of Little Hangleton, under a floorboard in a box, where Marvolo Gaunt's ring sat with its black stone catching what little light reached it. Harry knew the curse on it, the same curse that had cost Dumbledore his hand, and in the end his life, in the world that was gone. He had made Dumbledore swear to stay back. He approached it alone with the sword, and he did not touch it with his skin. Dumbledore had wanted to come into the shack. Harry had refused him with a flat finality that brooked no argument, and the old man, who had spent a lifetime being the one who refused others for their own good, had submitted to it with a wry and aching grace. You understand my objection, Dumbledore said, on the cold hillside above Little Hangleton, with the ruined shack squatting in its thicket below them. I have some small experience with cursed objects. If the ring's protection is what you say it is, it's worse than you think, and I know exactly what it does, and that's precisely why it isn't going to be you." Harry held his eyes. "In the world I came from, you put that ring on, Albus. You couldn't help yourself, there was something on it you wanted more than you wanted to keep breathing, and you put it on, and the curse in it killed you by inches over the better part of a year. I watched you die of it. I am not going to stand on this hill and watch the start of that a second time. You taught me once that there are things even you must not touch. Tonight you're going to take your own lesson and stay on this hill. A beat, please." And Albus Dumbledore, who had buried the temptation of that ring in the deepest vault of himself for 50 years, looked down at the shack that held it and understood, with the particular horror of a proud man shown his own grave, exactly how close he had once come and stayed on the hill. But he looked at the stone. He knew what it was. He had held it once in a forest, walking to his own death, the resurrection stone, the second hallow, the thing that called back the dead. He knew that if he turned it 3 times in his hand, the people he had lost would rise around him, insubstantial and beloved. The parents he had grieved his whole first life, the godfather, the friends the war had taken, every grave he had ever stood over given a voice for as long as he could bear to hold the stone. The wanting of it rose in him so suddenly and so hard that his hand shook above the box. And then he understood why he, of all people, was the one safe to destroy it. "I don't need you," Harry said aloud to the stone, to the dead. "That's the thing he never understood, and you wouldn't either. I'm not grieving them anymore. They're upstairs, they're at home. My mother made bad porridge with me this morning, and my godfather is 50 feet away complaining about the weather, and the boy I'd give anything to protect is sleeping in Hagrid's enormous, careful hands." His voice cracked and held. "I came back to live among them, not to call them out of the dark. You've got nothing to sell me." He brought the sword down on the ring, and the stone cracked, and whatever clung to the gold died with a hiss, and Harry did not turn the stone 3 times, and did not see the dead, and walked out of the gaunt shack into the cold with his grief, for the first time in 2 lives, entirely quiet. The diary was third, and it was the one they had to steal. It sat in the private study of Malfoy Manor, in a locked drawer of Lucius Malfoy's desk, and Lucius did not know what it was, only that his master had entrusted it to him with instructions to keep it safe and tell no one, and that with his master vanished the thing had become at once a treasure and a terror he did not dare be caught holding. Snape had drawn them a map of the house from memory, the patrol of the wards, the hours the family slept, the elf that did not. "We don't fight our way in," Harry told Sirius on the dark lane outside the manor gates. "We don't leave a mark. If Lucius wakes up tomorrow and the diary's simply gone, he'll assume his master sent for it, and he'll be too frightened to ask. If he wakes up to a broken ward and a duel on his lawn, he writes to people, and word travels, and the Wraith hears about it. We are ghosts tonight, in and out, and nobody the wiser." They went over the wall where Snape had told them the ward thinned, 2 men who had been the most accomplished troublemakers in the history of Hogwarts and had never quite grown out of it. And for an hour Harry Potter relived a skill he had thought he'd left behind in another war, the silent infiltration, the disillusioned crawl through an enemy's house, the slow, careful work of a locking charm undone without a sound. Sirius was extraordinary at it. Harry had always known abstractly that his godfather had been a soldier. It was a different thing to watch the young man move through the dark of Malfoy Manor like a shadow with a sense of humor, freezing when the house elf shuffled past, grinning in the black when it was gone. The diary came out of the drawer plain and black and unremarkable, a cheap thing, a schoolboy's journal, and it thrummed against Harry's palm with the same wrong life as the locket. He did not destroy it there. He would not risk the shriek of a dying Horcrux waking the house. They carried it out the way they had come in, over the wall and into the dark, and they did not breathe properly until the manor was a mile behind them. He destroyed it in a field under the stars, driving the basilisk fang clean through the center of it, and the diary screamed and bled black ink like blood from 100 punctured pages, and Tom Riddle's first and cleverest anchor died in the wet grass of an English midnight. Harry thought as it died of a girl he would now never have to save from it, a small red-haired girl who, in the world that was gone, had poured her heart into these pages and very nearly poured her life out after it. She would grow up safe in a crooked house full of brothers and never know how close she had come, and that was exactly the point. "That's 3, Sirius said softly, looking down at the ruined book. "How many of these damn things are there?" "1 more tonight," Harry said, "if you've got it in you. And then only 2 left in all the world. We're winning, Sirius, faster than he could ever have dreamed possible, faster than I dared hope." It was costing Harry more than he let any of them see. Each Horcrux took something, not from the body was young and strong and Lily's field healing kept it whole, but from somewhere deeper, the place the soul fragments reached for when they fought back. The locket had shown him the cupboard, the diary had shown him a corridor of graves. Each dying anchor flung its last cruelty straight at the oldest wound it could find in him, and Harry had a great many old wounds, more than a man of 21 should carry, and the fragments found every one. He came home from each hunt quieter than he had left it. Lily saw because Lily saw everything. She found him one night sitting on the cold step outside the safe house with the stars hard and white above the Welsh hills, not sleeping, the way he had not been sleeping for days. You don't have to carry it alone, she said, and sat down close beside him on the step, shoulder to shoulder. That was the whole point. You said you're not alone this time. I know. He didn't look at her. It's not the carrying, it's that they show me things, Mum. When they die, they reach into me and pull out the worst thing they can find and make me watch it. And the worst thing is never the war. It's always the being alone, 20 years of it, the cupboard and the not being wanted and the funerals. His voice was very low. And then I come home and you're here and he's here, and it's like waking up from the worst dream into the best one every single time, and I don't know how to hold both of those in the same chest. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she put her arm around the shoulders of the man wearing her husband's body, who was her son, and she said, "You hold them the way everyone holds them, badly in any way." She pressed her lips to his temple, the way a mother does, the way no one had done for the boy in the cupboard. "You came back from all of that to give it to him. Let me give a little of it to you while you're here. That's not weakness, that's just what a family is for." Harry leaned into his mother under the hard white stars and let her hold him, and for a few minutes the war and the cupboard and the long graves were a little further away, and that was enough to go on with. The diadem was fourth, and it was the easiest, because Harry knew exactly where it was and the place it hid and answered to him. They went back to Hogwarts in the small hours up to the 7th floor, to a stretch of blank wall opposite a tapestry of a man trying to teach trolls to dance. Harry paced in front of it 3 times, thinking the thought he had thought once before in another life: I need the place where everything is hidden, and the great door faded into being in the stone. The room of hidden things was a cathedral of lost and forbidden objects, a city of junk piled to the distant ceiling, the accumulated guilt and secrets of 1,000 years of students, and somewhere in its endless aisles, on a bust beside a battered old cabinet, sat a tarnished tiara that a desperate, brilliant boy named Tom Riddle had hidden here decades ago, and believed no one would ever find. Harry walked to it without hesitation. He had found it once before in this same impossible room, in a year of fire and loss, and the way to it was burned into him. "There," he said, and lifted the lost diadem of Rowena Ravenclaw off the bust, the lost treasure that half the wizarding world had given up as legend, and felt the soul fragment inside it stir and snarl. He carried it out of the room and into the corridor, where the air was clean and the magic of the place could not interfere, and he laid it on the flagstones and looked at Dumbledore, who had come this time, and who was gazing at the diadem with an expression of profound and complicated grief. 1,000 years of his school's lost history, defiled by a boy he had taught and failed. "Would you?" Harry held out the sword. "You taught him, Albus. Of everyone alive, I think this one's yours to end." Dumbledore took the sword. He was old, and his hand was not as sure as it had once been, but the goblin's silver came down clean and true, and Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem split in 2 with a wail that rang down the empty corridors of the sleeping castle, and the 4th piece of Lord Voldemort's soul guttered out and died on the stones of the school that had made him and the school that would, at last, unmake him. "4," Dumbledore said quietly, lowering the sword. He looked suddenly very tired and very free. "In 2 weeks, Harry, you have undone the work of decades. There remains only the cup and the snake that is not yet a snake." "The cup's the hard one," Harry said. "It's in a vault under Gringotts, behind every defense the goblins have, and there's no walking in and out of that the way we walked through Malfoy's study. We'll need to be cleverer than we've ever been, but 2 left, Albus, 2. And he's still hiding in a forest with no idea his soul is bleeding out behind him." He was wrong about the last part, and he would learn how wrong very soon. That night back at the safe house, they spread Snape's intelligence across the kitchen table and looked at the one piece left that they did not yet know how to take. "Bellatrix Lestrange's vault," Harry said, tapping the rough map Snape had drawn from a single overheard boast, "deep under Gringotts. The cup's in there behind the goblins' worst, and the goblins answer to no one, not the Ministry, not Dumbledore, not the Order. You can't requisition your way in. You can't charm a goblin, and you can't fight your way down through the cart tunnels and live. In the world I came from, we got it out by breaking into Gringotts and escaping on the back of a dragon, and I would very much prefer not to do that again." "A dragon," Sirius repeated, delighted despite everything. "You're making that up." "I wish I were." Harry rubbed his eyes. "The cup's the hard one. The others were hidden where their maker thought no one would look. This one's hidden behind people whose entire existence is built on not being robbed. We're going to need time and a plan cleverer than anything we've done yet, and we're going to need to take it before the Wraith works out which vault still holds a piece of him and warns the people who own it." He looked around the table at the faces of the living. "But it can wait a few days. We've torn 4 pieces out of him in a fortnight. He's frightened and he's far away, and he's down to a cup he can't reach and a snake he hasn't made. For the first time since I came back, I think we're allowed 1 full night's sleep before we start the next impossible thing." They did not get it, but that was not the cup's fault, and it was not yet that night's problem. In the forest the Wraith felt the diary go, and the diadem after it, and with each death it grew not weaker exactly. It had little enough strength left to lose, but smaller, more certain, more afraid. It had begun in the long dark between the killings to keep a kind of vigil over the pieces of itself, reaching out across the miles to brush each anchor and turn the way a miser counts coin in the night, and one by one the coins were vanishing under its very fingers. The diary that it had given to Lucius as a test of the man's loyalty and a seed for a future war gone. The diadem, hidden in the one place at Hogwarts it had been certain no one would ever find, gone. The wraith hung in the trees and understood that the hunter was not merely lucky, not merely well-informed, but had a complete and perfect map, and that there was only one such map in all the world, and that it lived behind Lord Voldemort's own eyes, and that somehow, impossibly, against every law the Dark Lord understood, someone else was reading it. In the forest the wraith screamed again, and with each tearing it understood a little more, until at last, through the agony, began to think. Four anchors gone in the span of a single fortnight, and no possible coincidence could explain it. Someone was hunting its soul. Someone not guessed, knew where the pieces of it lay, pieces it had hidden in a cave, in a shack, in a vault, in a school, places connected by nothing but the secret architecture of its own immortality, a map that existed in exactly one place in all the world, behind Lord Voldemort's own eyes, and yet someone else had the map. Someone was walking it, anchor by anchor, with a blade that could do what no blade should be able to do. The wraith hung in the dark and turned the impossibility over and over, and arrived at last at the only memory that fit the shape of it, a sitting room in Godric's Hollow, a man who fought like no James Potter could fight, and a presence behind the man's eyes that the wraith had looked into and recognized, too late, as something that had seen it die. "What are you?" the wraith whispered to the dark, in a voice that no longer had a mouth. "What crawled into James Potter's skin? What are you, and how do you know my secrets, and how do I make you stop?" It did not have the strength yet to act, but it had a servant in England who did, a small grey servant who believed himself a hero, and the wraith, gathering the last of its diminished will, reached west across the miles toward the only mind still tuned to receive it, and began, very faintly, to call. Peter Pettigrew had been having the best year of his life, and he did not understand why it had begun, in the last fortnight, to feel like the worst. He had everything he had wanted. He was alive, which was more than he had expected when he made his bargain. He was a hero of the Order, mourned in advance, and then joyfully embraced when it turned out the Potters lived. He had betrayed the most dangerous wizard in the world to the second most dangerous and come out the other side with everyone's love and no one's suspicion. The Dark Lord was gone. The danger was over. Peter Pettigrew had backed both horses and won, so why could he not sleep? It had started as a dream. A fortnight passed, a voice in the dark of his rented room, far off and faint and cold, calling a name that was his and was not, the name his master had used for him. He had told himself it was guilt, or bad fish, or the ordinary terror of a small man who has done a large and unforgivable thing. But the dream came again the next night and the next, and it was not getting fainter, it was getting clearer. And on this night, the 14th night, with the rain on the window and a candle guttering and his own hands trembling around a cup of tea gone cold, the voice came not as a dream but as a presence in the room with him, vast and patient and unmistakably, impossibly alive. "Wormtail," it said, and Peter's blood turned to water. "Wormtail, my faithful servant, you believed me gone. You are not the only one who believed it, but I am not gone, Wormtail. I am diminished, and I am far away, and I am being hunted by something I do not understand, and I have need, once again, of small gray hands willing to do what must be done." "My lord," Peter whispered to the empty room, and hated the gladness in his own voice and was helpless against it. "My lord, you're alive. Listen to me, Wormtail. The Potters live. James Potter lives, and there is something inside him, something that knows what I have hidden, something that is taking it from me piece by piece, and it must be stopped before it finds the last of me. You are inside their circle, you are trusted, you will be my eyes, and when the moment comes you will be my hands." The voice sharpened, and the cold in it could have frozen the rain on the glass. "Find out what James Potter has become, find out what he knows. And tell no one that I have spoken to you, or I will know, and I will not be merciful." Peter Pettigrew sat in the dark with the dead voice of his living master coiling through his skull, and wept and was afraid, and did, as he had always done, exactly what the most frightening thing in the room told him to. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. The Order and the Traitor. The trap for Peter Pettigrew was built out of the one thing the wraith had given them without meaning to, Peter himself. Harry had felt the shift in him before he understood it, a new wariness in the small man's eyes, a way Peter had begun to linger at the edges of Order meetings, to ask one too many gentle questions about what James had been doing with his evenings, about where the Potters were hiding, about the strange new gravity in his old friend's voice. Harry knew the look of a man carrying an order he was afraid of. He had seen it on Peter once before, in memory, in a shrieking shack a lifetime away. And he understood, with the cold clarity that had carried him through everything since Godric's Hollow, that the wraith had reached its servant, and that Peter Pettigrew was once again a spy in the house of his friends. So Harry gave him something to spy. He let it slip in front of Peter with the careful carelessness of a tired man talking too freely, that there was one last task left in the war, one final object that had to be destroyed before Voldemort could be ended for good, and that James Potter meant to do it alone in 3 nights' time, at the ruined cottage in Godric's Hollow, where it had all begun. He let Peter see him be afraid of it. He let Peter believe that James would be there, alone, unguarded, with the last secret of the war in his hands. It was a lie wrapped around a hook, and Peter swallowed it whole because the Wraith had told him to bring back exactly this, and because a frightened man always believes the story that lets him please the thing he fears most. He'll go to Godric's Hollow, Harry told the others, in the warded study with the trap laid. Not to fight, Peter doesn't fight. He'll go to watch in his rat form and report back to the Wraith. And the moment he transforms to send word, we take him in the open with the Ministry's own people as witnesses, so there's no possibility of the wrong story being told. He looked at Sirius. Amelia Bones owes Dumbledore a favor and hates a coward. She'll bring Aurors and she'll bring Veritaserum, and she'll watch Peter Pettigrew turn from a rat into a man with her own eyes, and then she'll hear him confess in his own voice. After that, Sirius, no one alive can ever pin a single thing on you. Your name comes out of this clean. Sirius's jaw worked, and then, Harry said, he answers for it, the right way, in front of the law, not in a ditch. They went to Godric's Hollow on the third night. The ruined cottage stood as it had stood since the attack, roped off by the Ministry, a shrine and a crime scene both, the broken doorway gaping black in the moonlight. Harry walked into it alone and visible, playing his part, a man come to do a secret and terrible thing, and all around him in the dark, disillusioned, silent, waited the trap. Sirius, Lily, two of Amelia Bones's hardest Aurors, and Bones herself, monocle glinting, wand ready, watching the man she had been told was about to do something extraordinary. Harry stood in the dead heart of the cottage and played the part of a frightened man with a terrible task, and it was not entirely acting, because the cottage remembered him and the cottage did not forgive. He had not been back since the night of the attack. The dead circle still scarred the wall where the first killing curse had struck. The boards were still splintered where he had blasted them upward into Voldemort's face. The chipped blue jug was gone, swept up by Ministry hands, but he could see exactly where it had hung. He moved through the ruin of the worst and best night of his life with his wand light low and his heart loud, and somewhere in the dark a rat watched him and believed every flicker of fear it saw, because every flicker was real, even if the cause was wrong. Come on, Peter, he thought, kneeling by the hearth as though tending to something hidden there. You've seen enough. You've seen me alone and afraid with the last secret of the war in my hands. Go and tell him. Lift your wand and become a man and send your master the good news. I'm right here. I've left the door open for you. For a long moment nothing moved, and then at the edge of the garden behind the fallen stone the small gray shape rose up onto its hind legs and the air shimmered and the rat began at last to become a man. Hello, Peter, said Sirius Black, stepping out of the dark. What followed Harry would remember for the rest of his second life as the moment the past finally let go of his godfather. Peter froze, caught mid-incantation, his eyes darting from Sirius to the Aurors melting out of the shadows to Amelia Bones's grim and disbelieving face. He tried the thing he always tried, the bluster, the betrayed innocence, the it's not what it looks like, and it died in his throat when Bones stepped forward with a flask of Veritaserum, and 3 drops fell on his tongue and the truth came out of Peter Pettigrew whether he willed it or not. He told them everything. He told them he had been the secret keeper. He told them he had carried the Potter's hiding place to Voldemort with his own mouth. He told them, weeping, that the Dark Lord lived, that a voice had come to him in the night, that he had been sent to spy. He named names. He confessed to a murder he had not yet had the chance to commit in this world, the street full of muggles, the blown gas main, the framing of Sirius Black, describing it as a plan, a contingency, the escape he had been keeping in his back pocket. And Amelia Bones listened to all of it with her face going harder and harder, and when it was done she looked at Sirius Black, whom half the Ministry had quietly suspected, and inclined her head in something that was almost an apology. Mr. Black, she said, it appears the wizarding world owes you a debt and the benefit of every doubt. I'll see the record reflects it. She turned to her Aurors. Take this creature to a holding cell. Bind his hands in his. Yes, I heard him. He's an unregistered animagus. See, he doesn't slip. Lord Voldemort lives. The Wizengamot needs to hear it from his own confessing mouth before dawn, and I will not have it said that Amelia Bones sat on news like that for the sake of anyone's comfortable sleep. It was Sirius who stopped them at the last with a hand on the Auror's arm. He crouched down in front of Peter Pettigrew, the man who had been his friend for 20 years and had sold his other friends to death, and for a long moment he just looked at him, and Harry watched and did not interfere because some reckonings a man has to be allowed to keep for himself. I wanted to kill you, Sirius said quietly. When James told me what you'd done, I wanted to find you and put my wand to your throat. He stopped me. He said do it right, do it clean, so they can never blame the wrong man. I didn't understand why it mattered so much to him until just now. He stood. It's because killing you would have cost me everything, Peter, and you're not worth a single thing it would have cost, so you get to live in a cell knowing the war you tried to win is being won without you by the people you betrayed. That's worse than anything I'd have done to you in a ditch, and I get to walk away from it a free man. Goodbye, Peter. And he turned his back on the weeping rat and walked out of the ruined cottage into the moonlight, free. Peter Pettigrew was tried in the open before the full Wizengamot, with his confession on the record and his animagus form demonstrated for the gallery, and the wizarding world watched a man it had nearly canonized be unmasked as the worst sort of traitor, the kind who hides among the people he has doomed and accepts their grief as his due. Harry made sure Sirius was in the front row. He had promised him that in the wreck of the cottage on the first night you'll be there, and it'll be done right, and you will walk away from it a free man with your name clean, and he kept the promise to the letter. Sirius Black sat in the front row of the public gallery and watched the law do, slowly and properly and unanswerably, the thing he had once been willing to throw his whole life away to do in a back alley with a wand. And when it was finished, when Peter had been sentenced and led weeping from the chamber, when the official record had been amended to note that Sirius Black had been wrongly suspected and was owed the apology of the ministry and the gratitude of the order, Sirius came and found Harry in the corridor outside and gripped him by both shoulders and could not, for a long moment, say anything at all. "You gave me this," Sirius finally managed. "I'd have killed him and gone to Azkaban for it and never even known what I'd thrown away. You stopped me. You made me wait and be clever, and now I'm James, I'm free, and he's the one in the cell, and my name's clean, and I get to—" His voice broke. "I get to be there for Harry, for all of it. You gave me my whole life back, and I don't even know how you knew to." "I knew," Harry said quietly, "because I once watched a version of this go the other way. That's all. Don't thank me, Sirius. Just be the godfather. That's the only payment I'll ever want." The Order of the Phoenix met in full for the first time since the attack, and Harry stood up in front of them and told them the war was not over. They had come expecting a victory celebration, more or less the original order, the one still living, faces Harry had known only from a scorched photograph in another life, and now saw breathing and arguing and passing bottles of butterbeer across Dumbledore's long table. The Prewett brothers, loud and enormous and alive. Marley McKinnon, whose whole family had died in the world that was gone. Edgar Bones, Dorcas Meadows, Caradoc Dearborn, the Longbottoms newly and quietly saved, Moody with his ordinary 2 eyes and ordinary leg and the look of a man who trusted no good news on principle. Harry looked at the long table of the dead who were not dead and had to grip the back of his chair for a moment before he could speak. Then he told them that Voldemort lived. That the body was destroyed but the man was not, that he had hidden his death in pieces across the world, that 5 of those pieces were now gone and 1 remained, and that the war they thought they had survived was instead a war they were, for the first time, actually winning. He did not tell them how he knew. Dumbledore stood at his shoulder and lent the telling his unquestioned authority, and Moody growled questions Harry answered flatly and well, and by the end of it the celebration had curdled into something grimmer and far more useful, a room full of fighters who understood, suddenly, that they had been handed the rarest thing in any war, a map of the enemy's whole hand, and a leader who could read it. "How do you know all this, Potter?" Moody demanded, the magical paranoia in him scenting something it could not name. "A year ago you were a good lad with a fast wand, now you talk like you've already read the ending." "Maybe I have," Harry said. "Does it matter, Alistair? You've spent your whole life wishing you could see the enemy coming. I'm telling you I can. The only question that matters is whether you'd rather argue about how or use it." Moody stared at him with his ordinary eyes for a long moment. Then he barked a laugh, short and harsh and approving. "Constant vigilance," he said, "and a man who's already seen the end. Hell, point me at them, Potter. I've waited a long time to fight a war I knew we were going to win." It was after the Wisengamot, in the grey hour when the news that Lord Voldemort still lived was racing across the country on 1,000 frightened owls, that Harry and Dumbledore finally had the conversation Harry had been bracing for since the night he woke. They were alone in the headmaster's office, the portraits feigning sleep, Fawkes watching from his perch. Dumbledore stood at the window with his back to the room, and when he spoke his voice had the careful evenness of a man choosing his ground. "The Wisengamot will panic," he said. "They will demand a champion, a symbol, a thing to point at and say there, that is why we are safe. And the symbol they will reach for is the child, the boy who lived. It has already begun in the press, you have seen it. There may be wisdom in allowing it. A frightened people fights harder for a hero than for an abstraction. If the boy were known, were positioned, were raised with the understanding of what may one day be asked of him." "Stop." Harry did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Stop right there, Albus, and turn around, because I want you to be looking at me when I say this." Dumbledore turned. "I know what you're doing," Harry said. "I've watched you do it before to me in the world that's gone. You take a child and you find the noble reason, and you build the whole long machine of his life around the day you'll need to spend him. You did it so gently I loved you for it right up until the moment I found out you raised me like a pig for slaughter, kept alive, kept hopeful, kept ignorant, so that on the appointed day I'd walk into a forest and let the enemy kill me, because it was necessary, because it was for the greater good." His voice stayed level, and that was worse than fury, and Dumbledore flinched from it. "I forgave you for it, because you wept when I found out, and because by then I understood the size of the thing you were carrying. But I did not come back through death in time to watch you build that machine a second time around the boy sleeping in my house. So hear me, he is not a symbol, he is not a weapon, he is not a card you keep in reserve for a dark day. He is a child, and he's going to grow up an ordinary boy who is loved, and the war is going to be won by grown men and women who chose it, with their eyes opened by me, by you, by the order, and not by an infant who never got a vote. Are we clear?" The silence stretched. And then Albus Dumbledore did a thing Harry had never seen him do in any memory or any portrait. He bowed his head fully, the gesture of a man accepting a judgment he knows to be just. "I have spent my life," Dumbledore said quietly, "believing that the people who can save the world have a duty to spend whatever it costs to do it themselves and others, and the innocent most of all, because the innocent are so very useful and ask so little until it is too late to ask. It is the oldest error of clever men who love the world more than they love any single person in it. You are the only one who has ever named it to my face." He looked up, and his eyes were wet. "You will keep naming it, I think. Good. I find I would rather be governed by your judgment than my own in this. The boy grows up a boy. You have my word, and I am old enough that my word has finally become a thing I keep." "Good," Harry said, and the cold went out of him, and something gentler took its place, because he had loved this man across 2 lifetimes, and the loving had never once stopped, even when it should have. "Then let's go win the war the right way, Albus, together. The way we never got to the first time." The Wizengamot heard Peter Pettigrew's confession before dawn, and the wizarding world woke to a front page that turned its joy to ash. "The Dark Lord lives," the prophet screamed, and beneath it, in smaller and somehow more terrible type, the rest of it. That the celebrations had been premature, that Voldemort had survived Godric's Hollow by means too dark to print, that a member of the Order of the Phoenix had confessed under Veritasrum to betraying the Potters and serving the enemy still. The country that had spent a month in bonfires and butterbeer reeled. The Ministry teetered. And into that reeling, Dumbledore moved with the surgeon's precision of a man who had been waiting his whole life to be believed. Harry watched him work and learned, again, why this man had been the only thing Voldemort ever truly feared. Dumbledore did not let the panic curdle into the witch hunts and the disappearances and the suspended liberties that Harry remembered from the war's second rising. He stood up in the Wizengamot with Amelia Bones at his side and Peter's confession in his hand, and he gave the frightened a thing to do instead of a thing to dread: names, targets, a war with a visible enemy, and a credible promise of victory. The order was made official, funded, deputized. The hunt for the remaining Death Eaters became the Ministry's own. And the secret at the heart of it, that the enemy was down to a single hidden anchor, and a man who knew exactly where it was, stayed inside the warded study where it belonged. "You're good at this," Harry told him afterward, and meant it as the high compliment it was. "Better than you let people see. You just turned the worst news in a decade into a war we're going to win, in front of 200 terrified politicians, in under an hour." "I have had," Dumbledore said with the ghost of a tired smile, "a very long time to practice being the one who is not allowed to panic. It is the least glamorous of all the magics, Harry, and the most useful. I commend it to you. You will need it, I think, when all of this is someone else's quiet, ordinary peace, and you are the only one left who remembers what it cost to buy." The Death Eaters came next, and they came fast, because Harry's foreknowledge was an ambush set across the whole of the coming winter. He knew where they would be and what they would do, and with Peter's confession ringing through a stunned Wizengamot and the secret out at last that the Dark Lord had survived, the Ministry at last had both the will and the warrant to move. The Order moved with it, and Harry pointed the way. The Lestranges, Bellatrix, her husband, her brother-in-law, gathering even now to torture 2 Aurors named Frank and Alice Longbottom into madness in search of their vanished master, were taken in their own safe house the night before they meant to act, and a baby named Neville, in a different house, went on sleeping in a world where his parents would wake every morning of his childhood and know his name. The Longbottoms were the save that broke Harry's composure, because it was the one he had not let himself believe he could make. He had known the date, known it the way he knew all the war's black anniversaries, and he had brought the order down on the Lestranges' safe house on the night before in the cold, small hours. While Bellatrix and her husband and Rebston and Barty crouched, the younger sat plotting the torture that would, in the world that was gone, leave 2 good Aurors broken in a hospital ward for the rest of their lives, and a baby named Neville to grow up visiting parents who would never know his face. It did not happen. Harry made sure it did not happen. The Order took the Lestranges in their beds, and the curse was never cast, and the wands that would have done it were snapped over an Auror's knee, and Frank and Alice Longbottom went on with their lives, never knowing how close the dark had come. Harry went to see them once after, not to explain, he could never explain, but only to stand in a doorway and watch Alice Longbottom bounce a round-faced, solemn baby on her knee while Frank made the child laugh, a whole and ordinary family in a warm and ordinary kitchen. He thought of the boy that baby had become in the other world, brave and lonely and raised by a fierce grandmother, who had pulled the sword from the hat at the last and struck the final blow of a war this baby's parents had been broken by. That boy would never exist now. This one would grow up laughing in this kitchen instead. Harry stood in the doorway until the ache in his chest grew too large to stand in a stranger's house with, and then he went home to his own impossible family and held his son and was quiet for a long time. "Another one," Lily said softly when he came in. She always knew. "Who?" "Friends," Harry said. "A whole family of them. They never knew they were in danger, and they never will, and that's exactly right." He pressed his face into the baby's hair. "That's exactly what it's supposed to feel like, I think, saving someone who never finds out. It's supposed to feel like nothing at all from the outside, like an ordinary Tuesday where nothing happened." Barty Crouch's son was caught with the others, and this time his father's grief did not have to curdle into the long secret horror of a smuggled prisoner. Dolohov, Rookwood, the Carrows, Mulciber, one by one on Harry's map, the architecture of the war's second half came down before it was ever built. Harry rode with Moody and the Pruett brothers on the night they took Dolohov and Rookwood, and he watched the old Auror fight for the first time with his own two eyes, and understood at last why the man's name had been a legend in the world that was gone. Moody fought the way Harry had learned to no wasted motion, no mercy, every spell a closing door, and when it was done, with two of Voldemort's deadliest servants bound and stunned on the floor of a Yorkshire farmhouse, Moody turned to Harry with something like respect cut into his battered face. "You knew they'd be here," he growled. "You knew Rookwood would run for the cellar and Dolohov would go for the window. You called it like you'd read it off a page." The ordinary eye narrowed. "I've stopped asking how, Potter. A man doesn't look a gift this size in the mouth twice, but I'll say this, whatever you are, you fight like someone who's already lost this war once and came back meaner. I've known exactly one other man who fought like that." He jerked his head toward the bound Death Eaters. "Difference is he fought like that because he was afraid of dying. You fight like a man who's already done it and decided it wasn't worth being afraid of." "Something like that," Harry said. Moody clapped him once on the shoulder hard, the highest compliment the old paranoid had in him. "Well, let's go and finish what you started then. I find I believe you when you say we're going to win." The night they took the Lestranges was the one Harry let himself care about most, and he let it himself. He knew the house, a cold grand pile in the West Country where Bellatrix and her husband in Rabistan had gone to ground after Godric's Hollow, plotting in the dark for a master they were certain would return. And he knew the date, the precise date, the night that in the world that was gone they had set out from this house to find two Aurors named Longbottom and torture them, past the borders of sanity in search of their vanished lord. Harry brought the order down on them the night before, in the cold dead hours, and it was not a duel so much as a reckoning. Bellatrix fought like the rabid thing she was, shrieking her master's name, and Harry took her wand arm with a curse he did not enjoy using and bound her on the floor of her own drawing room while she promised him deaths in a voice gone shrill with hate. He looked down at her, the woman who had killed Sirius in the other world, who had tortured a good woman into a hospital bed for 16 years, who would have done it again in 3 nights' time, and felt the old grief and the old fury rise, and set them aside because she was beaten and bound, and the thing that mattered was not her punishment but the two people in a different house who would now wake every morning of their lives sane and whole, and able to know their son's face. "You'll never understand what you just lost tonight," Harry told her quietly, crouching by the bound and spitting woman. "Not the fight, the thing you were going to do 3 days from now that you'll never get to do. There's a little boy who's going to grow up with his parents because of tonight, and you'll spend the rest of your life in a cell never even knowing his name. That's the only revenge I want on you, Bellatrix, that the worst thing you ever did is one you never got the chance to do." Harry walked out of the Lestrange house into the cold dawn and went home and held his son and thought of a round-faced baby named Neville sleeping safe in a different house, and was quiet for a long time. And from Bellatrix Lestrange, raving and bound, they took the one thing they needed that no map could give them, a single black hair for the heist that came next, because the cup was still in her vault and now they knew how to reach it. Polyjuice was Snape's art, and he brewed it grudging and perfect, and on a grey morning a month after Peter's fall, a tall dark woman with heavy-lidded eyes and Bellatrix Lestrange's exact and terrible face walked into the marble hall of Gringotts on the arm of a nervous, stooping wizard, and demanded, in Bellatrix's own imperious drawl, to be taken down to her family's vault. It was Lily under the woman's face because Lily had insisted, "You're too recognizable as James," and Sirius would laugh and Snape would sneer. "And a goblin would see through any of you in a heartbeat, but I can act, James. I've been acting brave for a year." And she played it flawlessly, the cold Lestrange arrogance, the casual cruelty, the absolute expectation of obedience, while Harry, disguised and silent at her side, watched the goblins for the first flicker of suspicion and found, to his enormous relief, that the foreknowledge held the same defenses, the same cart, the same vault, the same heaped and cursed treasure with the little golden cup of Helga Hufflepuff perched among it, humming its wrong and dreadful song. The minutes inside Gringotts were the longest of the whole campaign because there was nothing to fight and everything to lose. Harry hated it more than any duel, a duel he understood, a duel he could win. But the marble hall of the bank was all stillness and watchfulness, the goblins' black eyes missing nothing, and every second depended not on his wand but on Lily's nerve and the steadiness of a potion already beginning to wear thin. She was magnificent. She swept through the hall with Bellatrix Lestrange's cruelty worn like a cloak, snapping at the teller demanding speed, radiating the absolute contempt of a pureblood who had never in her life been told no. And when the old goblin at the desk hesitated, when his eyes narrowed, and he murmured something about additional confirmation of identity given the unusual circumstances, Harry felt the whole plan teeter on a knife's edge. It was foreknowledge that saved them. Harry had known the goblins might ask, had known the cannon-shaped suspicion would come, and Lily had been ready for it, and she drew herself up and said, in Bellatrix's most dangerous purr, that if a Lestrange could not access a Lestrange vault on a Lestrange's word, perhaps the goblin would care to explain that decision to the Dark Lord directly when he next called, and would the goblin like to wager his long, clever fingers on which of them the Dark Lord would believe? The bluff held. It held because it was exactly the sort of thing the real Bellatrix would say, and the goblin had met the real Bellatrix and did not care to meet her temper. He took them down. The cart ride into the deep was a plunge through stone and dark and cold, past the great chained dragon, pale and blind and scarred, and Harry's stomach turned at the sight of the beast he had once ridden screaming to freedom. And then the long vault stood open, and the cup sat among the heaped and deadly gold exactly where Harry's memory had promised it would be, small and golden and humming with the wrong kind of life. There Lily breathed in her own voice for the first time since they entered and reached out with the dragonhide glove. "Oh, you ugly little thing, after all that, come here." She lifted the cup and the vault's curse flared and the gold began to scald and to multiply, but they had come prepared and the glove held and the bag was warded and they were back in the cart and rising toward the light before the trap had finished waking. They walked out of Gringotts arm in arm, the cruel dark woman and her stooping companion, unhurried, ordinary, a pure-blood lady who had visited her vault, and they did not run, and they did not look back, and they disapparated from the steps with 90 seconds of polyjuice left and the fifth Horcrux humming in a bag against Harry's ribs. They did not multiply the treasure with their touch the way the cannon trap had. Harry knew the curse and they had come prepared, with dragonhide gloves and a sword and a plan, and they took the cup and left the gold, and they walked out of Gringotts with the fifth Horcrux in a warded bag and the polyjuice already starting to itch. And they disapparated from the steps before the hour ran out, and that night in the field behind the safe house, Harry drove the basilisk fang through Helga Hufflepuff's cup. And the fifth piece of Lord Voldemort's soul died screaming in the English dark. 5 of 6. Only the snake remained, and the snake was not yet a snake. In the forest, the wraith felt the cup die, and something in it broke that had never broken before. It had been counting. It had felt each one go, the locket, the ring, the diary, the diadem, and now the cup in Bellatrix's vault. The vault beneath the most secure building in the wizarding world, and with the death of the cup the wraith understood that there was nowhere it had ever hidden anything that the hunter could not reach. 5 of its anchors gone. One left, and it had not even made that one yet, the snake it had been saving, the final insurance, still only a serpent. The thing that had spent 50 years making itself immortal hung in the dark of the Albanian trees and felt, for the first time since it was a frightened orphan in a muggle bed, the nearness of an actual and final death. And then through the fear the old cunning rose, because Lord Voldemort had never once in his long life met a problem he did not try to turn into a weapon. If it could not hide from the hunter, it would make the hunter come to it. If it was running out of time, it would spend what was left on a single throw. It still had Pettigrew's last reports, gathered before the rat was caught. It knew where the Potters sheltered, knew the shape of their household, knew the one lever that would move James Potter from behind his wards and out into the open where a diminished thing might still, with surprise and cruelty and the last of its strength, win. It knew about the child. The wraith gathered itself and made the snake into the last of its soul at last, a hasty, agonized, imperfect Horcrux, made not in triumph but in desperation, the final anchor cast into a serpent's body with the dregs of a torn and dwindling will. And then, wearing the snake like a glove, drawing on the last reserves of the Death Eaters who had not yet been caught, Lord Voldemort began the long crawl west, back toward England, back toward Godric's Hollow, toward the family that had broken him and the man inside James Potter's skin who had taken everything, to make one final offer, and set one final trap and end it, one way or the other, where it had begun. It was Snape who confirmed the turn 3 nights after the cup died, arriving at the safe house gray-faced and grim with his left sleeve pushed up. "It stirs," he said without preamble, and showed them the mark, the skull and serpent burned into his forearm, faded these many months to a pale gray scar, now darkening before their eyes to a sullen, living black. "I have not felt it move since Godric's Hollow. It moves now. He is gathering what is left of us, the ones not yet in cells, calling them east and then turning them west. He is coming back, and he is in a hurry, and a thing like him does not hurry unless it is afraid." His black eyes found Harry's. "You have frightened the most frightening creature in the world into a corner, Potter. I did not believe when I came to that kitchen that it could be done. I believed you would get Lily killed a second time, chasing it. I was wrong, and I have rarely been so glad to be wrong." He made the snake, Harry said quietly. It was not a question. That's why the mark gone so dark so fast. He spent the last of himself anchoring his soul one final time because he knows it's all he has left. One more piece, Severus, and then there's nothing holding him to the world. Then he will come for you with everything he has, and it will not be much, and it will be more than enough to kill an ordinary household. Snape pulled his sleeve down over the darkening mark. Whatever you're planning, Potter, plan it well. He has nothing left to lose now but the very last of himself, and there's no creature on earth more dangerous than the one that has finally understood it can die. I'm counting on it, Harry said. A man who knows he can die makes mistakes. I've been waiting 2 lifetimes for him to make one. He held Snape's gaze. Thank you, Severus, for all of it. When this is done, there's a life waiting for you that doesn't have to be the one you had. I've seen the other one. This is better. Something flickered across Snape's hard face, not warmth exactly. The man had been too long without practice for warmth, but the distant possibility of it, a door he had thought walled up forever showing at last, a thread of light beneath it. He inclined his head and was gone into the night to walk back into the lion's mouth one final time, knowing this time exactly what he was walking toward. Harry felt it coming before any word reached him. He woke in the gray before dawn with the certainty sitting cold in his chest, the way it had sat the night he woke in James Potter's body, the sense of a thing in motion that could not now be stopped, only met. He went and stood over the cot as he did every morning and looked at the sleeping child with the unmarked forehead, and he understood that the last act had begun. He's coming back, he said when Lily found him there. I can feel it, down to Snake in a ruined body and the last scraps of his servants with 5 of his 6 anchors gone, and that's exactly when he's most dangerous, Mum, because now he's got nothing left to lose and only one move on the board. He'll come here. He'll come for the boy or for me or for you because we're the lever that moves me and he knows it. He doesn't have the strength for a war anymore, so he'll stake everything on one throw, one trap, one final offer on ground of his own choosing. He looked down at his son. And we're going to let him because there's only one piece of him left in all the world, and when it's gone he's a man again, an ordinary, mortal, killable man. I've waited 2 lifetimes to meet him as that. Lily came and stood beside him over the cot and took his hand, and neither of them spoke for a while. Then we finish it, she said at last, the way you always meant to, together. Together, Harry agreed, and outside, far off and coming closer, the last winter of the war drew in. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, a family saved. He chose the ground himself in the end because the one thing he would not do was let the war come to the house where his son was sleeping. The lure had come exactly as Harry knew it would. A message left in the dead drop the captured Death Eaters had once used, written in a hand Snape recognized, addressed to no one and meant for everyone. That the Dark Lord would come to Godric's Hollow on the night of the new moon, and that he would come for the child, and that James Potter could meet him there and spare his family, or hide behind his wards, and watch them die one by one as the last of the Death Eaters were spent hunting them. It was a bad trap, a desperate trap, the trap of a creature with almost nothing left. Harry read it and understood that Voldemort knew it was a bad trap and was setting it anyway, because it was the only move left on the board, and the thing about a cornered animal is that the corner makes it honest. There was a last morning before the new moon, and Harry let himself have it. He had learned, across 2 lifetimes of war, that you did not walk toward the end of a thing without first standing still inside the life you were fighting for, or you forgot, somewhere in the fighting, what the fighting was for. So on the last morning he came down before dawn as he always did, and Lily was already up with the baby on her hip, humming the nursery song, and Sirius was making a ruin of the porridge, and for 1 more hour the 4 of them were simply a household in a cold stone kitchen on a Welsh hillside, and Harry ate bad porridge with the dead who were not dead and held his son and said nothing about the night that was coming. Lily knew. She always knew. She caught his eye over the baby's head, and she did not ask him to promise he would come back, because she had been a soldier too, and she knew better than to ask a thing like that of a man walking toward what Harry was walking toward. She only held his gaze a moment longer than usual, and then passed him the child and let him have that hour. The plan itself was simple, because the simple plans were the ones that survived contact. Voldemort wanted James Potter alone and afraid at Godric's Hollow. Harry would give him exactly that, the bait perfect because most of it was true. But the dark around the bait would be full of the Order's best, hidden under Dumbledore's own concealment, and the sword of Gryffindor would be in the one pair of hands the snake would never think to fear, and the moment the last Horcrux died the most dangerous wizard in the world would become, for the first time in 50 years, a man who could be killed. Everything turned on the snake, kill the snake, and the rest was only a duel, and Harry had never in either life lost the duel that mattered. He'll know it's a trap, Dumbledore had said, studying the message on the table. He is not stupid, even diminished, especially diminished. He'll know, Harry agreed. And he'll come anyway because he's run out of any move that isn't a trap, and because he still can't imagine losing, not really, not in the place where he actually lives. 50 years of always being the most dangerous thing in the room doesn't come off a creature just because you've made it small. He'll walk up that lane certain that he's the cleverest thing in the dark. Harry's voice went quiet. He's going to be wrong about that for the last time. He wants me to come, Harry said, laying the message on the kitchen table. Alone, afraid, playing the noble husband. He's betting that James Potter's heart is bigger than his sense, and he's right about the heart. He's just wrong about everything else. So Harry went to Godric's Hollow on the night of the new moon, and he went alone, visibly, walking up the dark lane to the ruined cottage exactly as a frightened man would, and the dark around him was full of everyone he loved, because Harry Potter had learned long ago that the only thing better than walking into a trap was walking into a trap the enemy did not know was also yours. He let himself think on the walk up the dark lane of all the people who would never know what this night had cost or saved. The boy asleep in Hagrid's keeping who would grow up and never carry a scar. The red-haired girl in a crooked house full of brothers who would never be poured into a diary. The Longbottoms in their warm kitchen. The dead of a war that would now never be fought, every name on the long stone list, going about their ordinary, unremarkable lives in a world that had quietly been handed back to them by a man most of them had never met. None of them would ever thank him. That was the shape of the gift, Harry had come to understand. The best things a person could do for the world were the things no one would ever know to be grateful for, the disasters that simply failed to happen, the ordinary Tuesdays where nothing went wrong. He walked toward the last fight of 2 lifetimes carrying the names of everyone it would save, and not one of them knew his face, and that was exactly right, and it was enough. Lily was there under a disillusionment charm, with the sword of Gryffindor and a satchel of basilisk fangs. Sirius was there, and Moody and Dumbledore himself, silver-bright and terrible, the most powerful wizard in the world, come to stand in a garden on a moonless night and end a thing he had watched grow from a clever, friendless boy. The baby was far away, warded behind a Fidelius that worked this time, in Hagrid's vast, careful keeping. And Harry walked into the broken cottage where his first life had ended, and waited for the thing that had ended it. It came up the lane the way it had come the first time, slowly, unhurried, but the leisure was a lie now, a performance over a body that was failing. Lord Voldemort wore a shape again, stolen and stitched together out of dark magic and the last loyalty of his servants, but it was thin and wrong-colored, the body of a thing held to the world by a single fraying thread, and the great snake Nagini poured along the ground at its heel, vast and patient and humming with the last and most desperate piece of its master's soul. Harry took the measure of his enemy across the dead garden and felt, beneath the cold concentration of a man about to fight for everything, an emotion he had not expected, something close to pity. This was the thing that had murdered his parents and stolen his childhood and broken the world. This was the shadow that had lain across every day of his first life. And it had been reduced by 5 strokes of a venomed blade to this, a stitched-together body the color of a drowned thing, holding itself upright by will alone, flanked by a single snake and the last 3 servants too frightened or too faithful to flee. The last 3 Death Eaters had come with their master, the dregs of the once great host, and they hung back at the garden's edge in a knot of fear, and when the Order rose out of the dark to meet them, they barely fought at all. 2 went down under Moody's wand before they had their own properly raised. The 3rd threw his down and ran, and no one bothered to chase him because he was nothing now, a frightened man fleeing a lost cause, and the only thing in the garden that mattered was the duel at its heart. Harry was distantly aware of all of it, Dumbledore holding the line, Sirius and Moody sweeping the dark, Lily a shadow with a sword waiting for her moment, but it reached him as if through water. His whole world had narrowed to the ruined creature in front of him and the snake at its heel, and the single thread of certainty running through him like a spine. Kill the snake and then it ends. Everything else was noise. There was nothing of the god left in it. There was only an old fear wearing the shape of a man, the same fear that had driven a friendless orphan to tear his soul apart rather than face the dark that waits for everyone, magnified across 50 years of murder into the worst thing the world had ever made. Voldemort had never been anything, Harry understood, looking at the ruin of him, but fear that had been given power, and fear, stripped of its power, was only ever small. "You've changed since the last time you stood in this garden," Harry said. "Or no, you haven't, have you? That's the whole tragedy of you, Tom. You've been exactly this frightened thing the entire time, under all the power, under all the names. The snake, the body, the Horcruxes, they were all just walls you built around a scared little boy who couldn't bear that he was going to die like everyone else." He shook his head slowly. "I almost feel sorry for you. I would if you hadn't spent 50 years making everyone else pay for being afraid." "Sorry," Voldemort's lipless mouth twisted. "You feel sorry for me, I who have walked further along the path to immortality than any wizard in history. You ran further from death than anyone in history. That's not the same road. You never understood that it wasn't the same road." Harry raised the mahogany wand. "Let me show you the difference. One last lesson from the boy you couldn't kill in the house where you couldn't kill him. James Potter," said Voldemort, and even the voice was thinner now. "Or the thing that wears him. You have been busy." "I have," Harry agreed from the dark of the doorway. "5 down, Tom. You can feel it, can't you? How small you've got and how light." You spent 50 years making yourself too big to die, and now you're rattling around inside one snake and one borrowed body, and you finally worked out that I know exactly where the last of you is. Voldemort went very still. You cannot know about the snake. I know everything about you. I've known it since before you came up this lane the first time. Harry stepped out of the doorway into the open, the mahogany wand loose in his hand. That's the thing you've never been able to understand, the thing that's had you waking up screaming in a forest for months. You keep asking what I am, you're still asking, and the answer is so simple you'll hate it. I'm the part of this story you don't get to write. I'm the ending that came back to the beginning, and I'm here to finish it. Then finish it, Voldemort hissed and struck. The duel that began then was the last one either Harry would ever fight against this enemy, and it was nothing like the first. At Godric's Hollow on Halloween, Voldemort had fought with the careless, overwhelming strength of a god who had never lost. Now he fought like a man drowning, fast still, vicious still, but without reserves, each curse spent from a dwindling account, and Harry, who had stood against this enemy at the height of its power and lived, found that against the ruin of it he was simply, finally, the better duelist. He did not need tricks now. He met curse with counter-curse, drove Voldemort back across the dead garden, turned the killing curse aside with conjured stone and answered it with fire, and all the while he watched the snake. The cottage helped him in a way Voldemort could never have understood. This was the room where it had all begun, the dead garden where Harry's first life had ended in another world, and the place did not frighten him, it steadied him, the way the ground you have already bled on steadies a soldier. Every flagstone was a thing he had survived. He moved across it like a man moving through his own scar tissue, and Voldemort, who had expected the ground to unman James Potter, found instead that it had made him calm. Harry pressed him harder, and as he pressed he talked, because he had learned that nothing unsettled Voldemort like words in a fight. The creature expected silence and fury, and got instead a calm running commentary on its own defeat. "You're slower than you were," Harry observed, turning a flaying curse into the dead earth. "That'll be the Horcruxes. Everyone we destroyed took something out of you, didn't it? Not strength exactly, but ballast, anchor, the thing that kept you certain. You're light now, Tom, light and fast and a frightened thing fights like this." He sidestepped a killing curse and answered it with a hex that took Voldemort off his feet, where it should fight like this. He pressed the advantage, driving the Dark Lord back across the dead garden, never quite letting the rhythm break. "You feel it, don't you? The floor isn't firm anymore. The room isn't empty. Somewhere in the wide world there was one door you should have been afraid to open, and you opened it on Halloween night, and you've been falling through it ever since." "Be silent," Voldemort shrieked, and the curses came faster, wilder, the discipline of 50 years fraying into something close to panic, which was exactly what Harry had been talking him toward, because a panicking Voldemort was a Voldemort who overcommitted, and an enemy who overcommitted was an enemy you could finish. They fought up the length of the ruined garden and back. Voldemort threw curses Harry had not seen since the worst nights of the Second War, the black fire, the flaying hexes, a whip of pure killing intent that would have taken a lesser duelist's head, and Harry turned them, one after another, with the economy of a man who had nothing left to prove and no strength to waste. He had stopped, somewhere in the last months, being afraid of this creature at all. That was its own kind of weapon. Voldemort fed on fear, drew strength from it, had built his whole long reign on the certainty that the sight of him made men's hands shake, and the man in front of him now fought with the steady, unhurried competence of someone tidying up a long overdue chore. "Why don't you fear me?" Voldemort snarled, and a curse cracked the stone where Harry had stood. "Everything fears me. Everything has always feared me." "I used to." Harry turned the next curse into the dead earth. "When I was a boy in the world you made, you were the worst thing in my whole life for 17 years, Tom, the shadow over every single day of it. And then I walked into a forest and let you kill me, and I found out the thing you spent your whole existence refusing to learn, that the other side of the fear is nothing at all. Just quiet, just rest." He drove Voldemort back another step. "After that, there was nothing left in you to be afraid of. You'd already done your worst to me, and I'd already walked through it, and here I still was. You stopped being a nightmare the day I stopped waking up from you." It was then, with the duel turning hard against him, that Voldemort sent the snake, exactly as Harry had known he would, exactly as he always did when the contest slipped out of his hands, because the snake was the whole of it. Nagini came at him low and fast through the dark, and Harry had been waiting for exactly that, and he did not break the rhythm of the duel by so much as a beat. He simply said into the dark, in a voice pitched for one listener, "Now, Lily." The disillusionment fell away, and Lily Potter rose up out of the dark of the garden with the sword of Gryffindor in both hands and the whole of a mother's fury behind it, and she brought it down on the great snake's neck as it lunged, and Helga Hufflepuff's blade, drunk with basilisk venom, sheared clean through the last Horcrux of Lord Voldemort in a single stroke. The snake's head struck the ground and rolled. And Lord Voldemort screamed, not the scream of pain. He had screamed in pain before, but a new sound, a sound that had never once in 50 years come out of that throat. The sound of a thing feeling the floor fall out of its immortality, the last anchor gone, the soul that had spread itself across the world in 6 proud pieces suddenly small and whole, and trapped in one failing borrowed body with nowhere left to flee. For one instant in the moonless dark, Tom Riddle and Harry Potter looked at each other, and both of them understood the same thing at the same time. Voldemort was mortal. No, Voldemort whispered. No, I have come too far. I am Lord Voldemort. I have conquered death. I have. You ran from it, Harry said. That's all you ever did. You were so afraid of dying that you tore your soul into pieces and called it conquering, and you never once understood that the people who beat you, my mother, the first time, with nothing but love in her own life, beat you because they weren't afraid of it. That's the whole secret, Tom. That's the thing you went to your grave never learning. In every world there is. The ones who will die for something are always going to beat the one who will do anything not to die at all. And Lord Voldemort, mortal at last, threw everything he had left into one final killing curse, the same curse he had opened with at this same cottage in another life, the curse that had made Harry an orphan and a legend and a weapon, and Harry Potter, who had died once already and found it nothing to fear, did not turn it aside this time. He met it. The two spells met in the dark of the garden and held, red against green, a thread of impossible light strung taut between two wands, and Harry felt the whole weight of the thing bear down on him through the connection, the dwindling, frantic, total force of a soul with nothing left behind it but the terror of its own ending. He did not try to overpower it with strength. He had learned the hard way that you did not beat Voldemort with strength. There was always more rage in the creature than there was in any decent man, because decency held things back and rage held nothing back at all. He beat it the way it had always in the end been beaten, with everything that was not fear. He poured into the lock the cold stone kitchen and the bad porridge, and his mother's hand on his and his son's fist knotted in his robes. He poured in Sirius young and laughing, and Dumbledore's bowed head, and Snape's door with the light beneath it, and the Longbottom's warm kitchen, and every single life the death of this creature would now let go on. He poured in the cupboard, too, and the forest, and every grave not as grief now but as ballast, the whole weight of a life that had been hard and was, in spite of everything, worth having lived, set against a soul that had spent itself buying a forever it had never once enjoyed. And the green light began to give. Voldemort felt it go, and his red eyes went wide, and for the second time in 2 lifetimes Harry watched the creature understand, far too late, that it had been wrong about the most fundamental thing of all, that the man across the lock was not afraid, had nothing left to be afraid of, had already crossed the only river Voldemort had ever truly feared, and come back to tell him there was nothing on the far bank but quiet. The terror in the red eyes was absolute. It was, Harry thought, the most honest thing Tom Riddle had ever shown the world. It did not take long. The killing curse broke through, because there was a whole man behind it and only a frightened fragment behind the other, and the green light that had failed to kill an infant in this house struck the body of Lord Voldemort, and this time, with no Horcrux left in all the world to catch the fleeing soul, with nowhere for the torn and dwindling thing to run, it did what the killing curse was always meant to do. It ended him. The body fell. There was no scream this time, no smoke fleeing west, no wraith crawling into the dark to wait out the years. There was only a thin, ruined, mortal body crumpling onto the dead grass of the garden at Godric's Hollow, and a silence, and then the ordinary sound of the wind, and the war that had eaten one Harry Potter's entire childhood was, in the space of a single breath on a moonless night, finally and completely over. For a moment the garden was utterly silent. Then the dark gave up the people hidden in it. Dumbledore lowered his wand, and on his ancient face was an expression Harry had never seen there in any memory, not triumph, not relief, but a vast and weary peace. The look of a man who has carried a weight for a lifetime and felt it, at last, lifted clean away. Moody let out a breath that was half a laugh and half something rower. The last 3 Death Eaters had already fled or fallen, and it did not matter which. Their master was a corpse on the grass, and their war was a thing that would now never be fought. Sirius came out of the shadows, staring at the body as though it might yet rise, his wand shaking in his hand, 20 years of dread draining out of him so fast it left him swaying. "That's it," Sirius said hoarsely. "That's James, that's it, isn't it? He's dead, he's actually dead, it's over, it's over." Harry lowered his own wand, and the mahogany felt suddenly very heavy in his hand, heavier than it had been a moment ago, and he did not yet understand why. 16 years early, every name on the list, all of them get to live now. His voice was strange in his own ears. "We did it, we actually did it." And then the cold breath of the price reached him, and he understood why the wand had grown so heavy, and why the color was beginning to drain out of the edges of the world. Harry Potter stood over the body of his enemy in his father's garden and waited to feel triumph, and what he felt instead was the first cold breath of the price. It began at the edges, the way the light goes at the start of an eclipse, not a darkness falling but a thinning, a sense of the world's color draining by degrees toward something he could not name. Harry looked down at his hand on the mahogany wand and saw, for just a moment, the dead garden through it, as though the hand were becoming a thing the light could pass through. He felt no pain. He felt instead a vast and gentle pull, like a tide that has finished coming in and begun at last to go out. He understood it at once because he had always understood the shape of his own endings before they arrived. The war was over. Voldemort was dead, truly dead, this time in the year 1982 instead of 1998, 16 years early. The whole long catalogue of the war's dead struck out before most of them had been written. Frank and Alice Longbottom would raise their son. The Bones family would not be murdered. A red-haired girl would never pour her soul into a diary. Cedric Diggory would grow up and grow old. Fred Weasley would never stop laughing. Dobby, Hedwig, Remus, Tonks, Mad-Eye, Snape, Sirius, his mother, his father, all of them, every name on the long stone list Harry had carried in his chest for 2 lifetimes, would simply live. The future that had been was unmade, root and branch, and a new one was settling into place behind it like still water closing over a stone. And the trouble with unmaking that future, the price he had known about since a station that was not a station and had chosen gladly to pay, was that the future being unmade was the one that had made him. There was no place in this healed world for a Harry Potter who had grown up in a cupboard and fought a war and died in a forest and come back through time and death to undo it all. That Harry was a thread that led back to a future that no longer existed. He was the last knot in a story the world had just finished rewriting, and the world, having rewritten it, was reaching out with an enormous and patient gentleness to smooth the knot away, to let the man come undone so that the boy could simply be a boy, and the father could simply be a father, and the timeline could close clean and seamless and whole, with no impossible orphan left over from a war that had never happened. Harry. Dumbledore was beside him, and the old man's face was wet, and there was no surprise in it, only a grief that had been waiting since the night he first guessed. I felt it begin. I had hoped I was wrong about the cost. I am so rarely wrong, and I have never in my life so badly wished to be. You weren't wrong. Harry's voice was steady. The thinning had not reached it yet. You told me. Both times you told me those who meddle in the deep currents to save what they've lost are playing a game whose rules they didn't write. I knew the rules when I sat down at the table, Albus. I knew them at Godric's Hollow the first night when I woke in this body and worked out what saving them would mean. He looked at the old man and smiled, and it did not shake. I'd have paid more. I'd have paid anything. This is the cheapest thing I've ever been asked to buy. James. Sirius came crashing through the dark, having seen, not understanding, his friend going translucent in the moonless garden. James, what's happening? What's wrong with you? Somebody. It's all right, Sirius. Harry caught his godfather's arm, and his grip was already lighter than it should have been. It's all right, listen to me. You're free, and your name is clean, and Peter's in a cell, and the war is over, and you're going to be the best thing in that boy's life that isn't his own parents. I need you to do that for me. I need you to spoil him rotten and teach him to fly and be exactly the godfather you were always going to be. Can you do that? James, you're scaring me. Promise me, Padfoot. Yes, of course, anything but good. Harry let him go. That's all I needed. Then he turned because she was there, because she had been there the whole time, standing a little apart with the sword of Gryffindor still in her hand and the snake's blood on the blade. And she was not crying out, and she was not confused, because Lily Potter was the only person in the garden who understood exactly what was happening, and she had understood it, Harry realized, for longer than he had let himself know. You knew, he said, since the kitchen, the first morning. Her voice was thick, but it held. You told me you walked into a forest and let him kill you, and you said it the way a person says a thing they've already decided to do again. I've known since then that you came back to spend yourself. I let myself hope I was wrong the way Albus did. Mothers are allowed to hope they're wrong about that more than anyone. A tear broke and ran. Harry, my Harry, it's really you in there. It was always you. It was always me. The thinning had reached his chest now, a lightness, a letting go. He was not afraid. He had been afraid in the forest the first time, terribly afraid, a boy of 17 walking to his death with the dead walking beside him. He was not afraid now. He was going home. Mum, there's one thing before I go. He could not finish it, but she was already moving, already calling into the dark, and Hagrid came through the broken garden gate with the warded bundle in his arms, because of course they had kept the baby close, of course they had, and Lily took her sleeping son from the weeping giant and brought him to the man who was disappearing in the moonlight and put him gently into Harry's fading arms. And Harry Potter held himself. He held the warm sleeping weight of the child he had been, the small unscarred forehead, the tuft of dark hair, the fist that came up in sleep and knotted itself in the front of James Potter's robes, the same fist that had refused to let him go on the night this all began, a lifetime and a few short months ago. He held the boy who would grow up in this house, with this mother, with this father, with that ridiculous loyal godfather, who would never know a cupboard or war or grave, who would have the one thing the man holding him had crossed death itself to give him. He bent his head over his own infant hair and breathed in the smell of him one last time, milk and wood smoke and clean child, and the tide went out a little further, and he found that he was, against everything, smiling. Hey, he whispered to the sleeping baby, to himself, to the boy who would never remember this and would live a whole bright ordinary life because of it. Hey, It's all right, you're going to be all right, you're going to be so loved you won't have room to imagine anything else. I promise, I came all this way to promise you that. The baby slept on and did not wake, and that was exactly right. Harry lifted his head and looked at his mother over the top of his own small, sleeping skull, and he understood the last thing, the thing the eclipse had been moving toward all along. He was not being erased, that was the fear, and it was wrong. The thinning was not a deletion, it was a homecoming. The man was not vanishing into nothing, he was going where he had always been trying to go, back into the family he had lost, back into the father whose body had carried him through all of it. James Potter would remain. James would wake in this garden in a moment with the war won and his family whole, and no clear memory of the last few months, but a strange new depth somewhere behind his heart, an inexplicable fierce tenderness toward his son that no first-time father could quite account for, a way of looking at Lily as though he had crossed an unimaginable distance to reach her. James would raise the boy. And the boy would grow up loved by a father who was, in the deepest and most secret truth of it, also himself, the two Harrys folding at last into one, the eclipse passing, the long shadow sliding off the face of the light. Tell him, Harry said to his mother, and the words were coming slower now, lighter, each one a little further away. When he's old enough, not all of it, just tell him he was wanted. Tell him from the start every day that he was wanted. That's the whole thing. That's everything I came back for. Every day, Lily promised, weeping, holding her son and her son both, the baby in her arms and the man in her eyes. Every single day of his life, I swear it. I know you will. The garden was very bright now, brighter than any moonless night had a right to be. The white light rising the way it had risen in the ruined sitting room when two people refused to let a child die, the oldest magic, love that does not count the cost, offered with open eyes. It had turned the curse that night, now it was turning him gently home. It's funny, Harry said, and his voice was almost gone, and it was full of wonder and not grief at all. I spent my whole first life wishing I could see you, just once, just to know your face, and I got months. I got porridge and bad tea and your hand on mine and the whole of you alive. Nobody ever got a gift like that. Nobody in the whole history of the world ever got what I got. Harry, it was worth it, Mum, tell me you understand that. It was worth all of it, every grave, every year. The cupboard, the forest, all of it, it was the price of this, and this was worth any price there is. The light was everywhere now, and the tide was almost out, and the last thing he felt was the small warm weight against his chest and his mother's hand closing over his, and the certainty, absolute and sweet and final, that the boy would grow up. Don't be sad, please, you're not losing a son tonight. You're getting to keep one, we got to be both for a little while, that's all, that's the whole secret of the thing. A breath, the faintest thread of a voice. I love you, I always knew I would if I ever got the chance to know you. Goodbye, Mum, look after him for me, look after us. And the white light rose up and gathered the man who wore James Potter's body into itself. Gently, the way a tide takes a small boat home, and the long shadow that had lain across the face of the world since a child first woke in a cupboard slid away into nothing, totality passing, the light returning, the eclipse complete, and where a man had stood fading in a garden full of his living family, there was only James Potter, blinking, whole, alive. With his sleeping son in his arms and no clear memory of how the body of Lord Voldemort had come to be lying dead on the grass at his feet. James Potter looked down at the child in his arms, and something moved behind his hazel eyes that had not been there a year ago, a depth, a grief that was also a joy, a tenderness too large for a man who had simply won a war. He did not understand it. He would never quite understand it, all the long happy years of his life. He only knew, with a certainty that arrived from nowhere and never once left him, that this boy was the most wanted child who had ever been born, and that he, James, had been given something he could never name and must never waste, and that he would spend the rest of his life being worthy of it. Lily, he said, dazed, holding his son. Lily, I think it's over. I think we won. I had the strangest, I can't remember. He looked at her, and saw that she was weeping, and crossed to her, baffled and tender, and gathered his wife and his son into his arms in the brightening dark. Hey, it's all right, we're all right. We made it, love, all three of us, we made it. All three of us, Lily Potter whispered into her husband's shoulder, holding the two halves of her son, the boy in his father's arms and the man in her unbreakable memory. And over James's shoulder she looked up at the sky, where the last of a strange white light was fading into ordinary stars, and she said it again to the light, to the son who had crossed death and time and given everything so that this exact moment could exist, the most ordinary and impossible moment in all the world. A family alive in a garden at the end of a war that no longer had to happen. All three of us, thank you, my love, rest now, we've got him from here. Far above the garden the new moon hung dark and clean in a sky scrubbed of every shadow, and the war was over 16 years before it had ever been won, and a boy who would never know a cupboard slept on in his father's arms, wanted past all the telling of it, in a world his oldest self had reached back through the dark to build, and the eclipse was over, and the light had come back, and it would not go out again. Years later, when Harry Potter was a boy of 11 with his mother's eyes and his father's unruly hair and not a single scar on his forehead, he would ask his parents, the way children do, where he had come from, and why his father sometimes looked at him with tears in his eyes for no reason at all, and why his mother had told him every single day of his life, without fail, before anything else, that he was wanted. And Lily Potter would gather her son into her arms and hold him and tell him the only part of it he ever needed to know. Because once, she would say, someone loved you so much that he crossed the whole world to make sure you'd be here. And he is, my darling, he always will be. He's closer than you think. And Harry Potter, who had never woken in a cupboard, never lost his parents, never carried a war he didn't choose, never been anything in his whole bright ordinary life but a boy who was loved, would not understand it and would laugh and squirm out of her arms to go and fly the broomstick his godfather had given him, out across a garden where nothing terrible had ever happened. And that, in the end, was the whole of the gift. Chapter 7 End.